Sorcery and Spells. Melancholy Maine Magicks Book 1. By Sierra Graves. Chapter 1. Hadley. The timer dinged, echoing around the warm bakery kitchen. I hummed as I slipped bright blue oven mitts over my hands, turned off the timer and opened the oven door. "Ah, there you are," I said to the fresh batch of blueberry muffins which I'd imbued with the essence of confidence. They smelled delicious as always, and I plopped them on the counter to cool. Still humming, buzzing with a dash of cheeriness, I took a sip of the dark roasted coffee to which I'd added a dash of the essence of confidence and snapped my fingers. The ingredients on the counter behind me rose into the air and dumped themselves into the large mixer, one after the other. Flour puffed into the air in a small white cloud as I snapped again and twirled my fingers. The mixer turned on and went to work on the next batch of muffins. What to add this time? I mused, tapping my chin and holding the warm blue mug. Dark clouds blocked out the rising sun. Rain was coming. I could tell that much by the small thunderstorm swirling around the weather mirror in the shop front. A dreary day on the coast of Maine wasn't that unusual. Most people were used to it, but a touch of optimism as a bonus ingredient never hurt anyone. I flicked my wrist, and the solid wood double-door cabinet swung open. Inside were shelves filled with glass vials of glowing sparkling liquids, glittering bowls of powders, and several bits of varying crystals of color and size. I searched the shelves for what I was looking for and nodded when the bright yellow vial slid to the forefront. "There you are. Into the mixer, please." Another nod, and the small vial rose into the air, floated to the mixer and tipped itself over. A bit more than I intended went into the mixture, but I wasn't sure what I expected. Optimism was always a bit overexcited at being used. Well, everyone in town will feel chipper today. The vial returned to the cabinet, and I refilled my coffee. Once the next batch of muffins was ready for the oven, I snapped once more, and without looking up from my handwritten recipe book, I waved. Pans clanged, and eventually the oven door opened. I heard the familiar sound of a muffin pan sliding inside to bake. Muttering about one of Nana's old recipes I hadn't tried yet, I set the timer for the muffins and wondered if today would be the day I finally tried that recipe. Mom had given me all of Nana's recipes when I opened the bakery attached to our magic shop. Out of my 4 sisters, I was the only one with a knack for baking without burning the whole place down. Leaning back against the wooden island, I appraised the photograph of our family hanging by the back door. Well, most of our family. Nana had passed away 10 years ago. Mom and Dad were still around, simply retired along with some other witches from our coven. All of them were living in Arizona now. They went from Maine to a desert. Still made me chuckle some days when Dad would call to complain about the heat. Mom was always in the background, yelling it was a dry heat, and he needed to suck it up. I wanted them to be happy after all they'd been through. My sisters and I decided to stick around after the tragedy. Melancholy Maine was our home. Nothing was going to make me leave it. Not one damn thing. My blue eyes lingered on the face in the photograph. I hadn't seen that face in years, and probably never would again. Her eyes matched mine in that picture, dark blue like when the sea raged during a storm. The last time I saw our eldest sister, that color had been replaced by a violent violet. There had been so much evil in her, it was like I'd been stabbed through the heart. Then she turned her back and walked away. Absently, I rubbed my chest as an echo of that pain came back to me. She made her choice, but in truth it would always be my fault she left. I hadn't been there for her when she needed me. I hadn't been able to save her from turning. I failed her as a sister, something I was apparently good at. Distant thunder rumbled, and I peered out the windows. A storm was definitely on the way today. Taking my coffee with me, I hustled out of the kitchen, passed through the storeroom and into the shop. The weather mirror was perched on the wall to the right, above a collection of elemental crystals sparkling and crackling with power. Rain battered the glass, and lightning flashed every few seconds within the mirror. I smirked when the first few drops of rain pattered the sidewalk outside. Within minutes the skies opened, and rain poured over our small town. The bell over the back door jingled, and I heard the grumbling voices of Hedrina and Helena. I spared a quick glance around the shop, noting the books which needed to be sorted, and that the herbs along the shelves to the left of the store required resupplying, then headed back to join them. Being the baker in the family meant I was up around 3:30 every morning. Hedrina had never been much of a morning person, but lately she'd become almost unbearable before 8 o'clock. Helena was fine as long as she had something to eat right away. "Did you two enjoy your shower?" I teased as they shook out their wet jackets and hung them on the coat rack by the door. Helena smiled. Not much could put that girl in a bad mood. Her brightly colored blouse of violets and greens matched the beaded necklace at her throat, and the mix of bangles on both wrists jingling when she moved. Studs of the same colors spread up both ears, and there was another in her nose. Her bootcut jeans were soaked to the knees, and her black boots were covered in flecks of mud. Hedrina, on the other hand, glowered at my comment. Her stormy gray eyes shifted to a light blue that was nearly white, then back to their natural color. She wore dark skinny jeans, knee-high black boots, and black sweater that hung off her right shoulder. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a clip, though now it was soaking wet and falling out. Hands twitchy with annoyance, she hastily redid it, glaring at me the whole time. "You're funny, you know that?" she muttered and traipsed to the coffee pot. I glanced at Helena, who had been waving her hand over our sister's head. Her eyes went wide, and she mouthed something, but I had no idea what she was trying to say. Although her pixie-cut auburn hair was flattened to her head from the rain, she seemed her typical put-together self. Her blue eyes slid from Hedrina, then back to me, as she kept trying to relay a message silently and without any luck. "She's trying to tell you, I've been a bit on the grumpy side all morning," Hedrina said without turning around. Helena's hands went to her hips as she scowled at our youngest sister. "Don't give me that look." Hedrina poured peppermint creamer into her coffee and stirred it with a twitch of her head, making the spoon come to life. "You're lucky I got out of bed this morning. Lucky I'm moving around at all, so just let it go, all right? I'm going to check the shop." She stormed to the storeroom, slamming the kitchen door shut behind her. Thunder rumbled overhead, shaking the pans and glassware on the shelves. I exchanged a concerned look with Helena. I didn't think this storm was predicted for today. She woke up screaming. Helena sighed and rubbed her forehead. She'd been doing so good. "I know." I frowned at the door leading to the storeroom. She say what she dreamt about? Nope. You know how she is. Have to pry everything out of that damned girl with a crowbar, or a truth serum, she added with a twitch to her lips. Once or twice, more than that actually, we'd used truth serum on our little sister. She had been an introvert before the incident. Now it was 100 times worse. A sister had to do what a sister had to do. I mean, I'm ready to deal with the backlash if you are. How about we hold off for a few hours? I suggested. I'd like today not to be terrible. Thunder boomed outside as lightning flashed through the windows. The power flickered but stayed on, not that we'd ever truly be in the dark. Helena's brow rose. Aha. I'm not sure the town can handle another one of her moods. Lightning cracked just outside and we jumped. I spilled coffee all over my dark blue apron and cursed when it burned my hand. Damn it. What the hell did it to her this time? You sure you want to wait? Helena asked as she checked over my burnt hand. It was just a little red, nothing I wasn't used to. Then she handed me a towel, and I dabbed at the coffee, wetting my apron and navy button-down flannel shirt. Maybe she should stay in the back today. It might be best if she just goes home. The door to the kitchen swung open, and Hedrina walked in, holding her hand to her forehead. I think. Whatever else she tried to say was lost when she toppled forward. I rushed forward with Helena to catch our sister, and got her to a chair. Sorry. Took more out of me than I thought. Hedrina's voice was weak. It's all right, no harm done, I said and smoothed a few loose strands of hair away from her face. You feeling sick at all? Headache? Just the headache, she replied, then groaned quietly. Damn it. You want to talk about the dream now? Helena pushed, and I rolled my eyes. What? It's better when she talks about them. Says who? Hedrina winced, holding her face in her hands. I don't understand what keeps triggering it, I said quietly, more to myself than them. Clearly, the presence firmly attached to my baby sister was paying very close attention because the air changed, making it hard to breathe as it always did when the monster stirred. Hedrina raised her head and cackled, the sound dark, like gravel being crunched underfoot. Her eyes were nearly white as they narrowed. First at me, then at Helena. Her lip lifted in disgust as the screeching laughter poured out of her mouth. The first time I heard it, I'd been terrified. Not anymore. Ah, come on, the gravelly voice said as Hedrina winked. You know I still frighten you. Make the hair on your neck stand on end. Send a shiver creeping down your spine. No, you don't, I affirmed. Why don't you go back to whatever hole you've been sleeping in, and stay there? Leave her alone for good. Afraid I can't do that. Unless, of course, you want your precious sister to die. You know we don't, Helena snapped, her hands shaking. I took hold of them to help steady her nerves. One day, though, we'll find a way to get you out of her for good. Hedrina shrugged and leaned back in the chair. No, you won't. Besides, I've grown to like it here. So cozy and warm, so powerful. She tilted her head, and everything sitting on the counter levitated. The cabinet with my secret ingredients shook violently as the storm picked up a few notches outside. Rain slammed into the windows, and the wind howled as if it was a vicious animal trying to get inside. One day your sister will decide the fight isn't worth it, and then the real fun will begin. You should have let her die. I gulped as Helena cursed. You bastard. The cackling returned, then choked off. Everything that had been hovering in the air crashed down, as Hedrina sucked in a pained breath and shuddered. Her eyes fluttered, and the dark gray returned for just a second. Then they rolled back into her head, and she slumped in the chair. Call Roger, I told Helena. Tell him to come and get her. She needs to be at home today. Helena went to grab the phone, as I pressed my hand to Hedrina's forehead. She was burning up, but that was normal after an episode. You should stop worrying so much, she whispered. I did this to myself, remember? How about we not talk about it right now? Helena popped her head back in the doorway with a nod, then disappeared again, still talking on the phone. Roger's going to pick you up and take you home. You need to rest. We can handle the store without you today. No, I can work, she insisted and tried to stand. Her legs wobbled and she fell into me. The weakness afterward was normal too. Another sharp pain shot through my chest as the guilt piled on. Once Heather had turned and abandoned us, I became the oldest sister. I was supposed to look out for Helena and Hedrina. I should have been able to stop this from happening. Instead, I was as much to blame for the situation, if not more than my little sister. The oven timer dinged, startling me. I'd forgotten I had another batch baking. Go on, I'm fine here, Hedrina said, waving me away. Promise I won't move. The good mood I'd been in all morning evaporated. I removed the muffins from the oven, then turned it off. I planned to make a few more batches of cupcakes and try out some other recipes today, but now all I wanted to do was keep an eye on Hedrina. There was very little that could dampen my drive to stay in the kitchen all day. Watching her endure another episode from that sick, twisted demon was something that could. I plated up the muffins and took them through to the front. Helena was just unlocking the front door to let Roger in. Thankfully, he only lived 2 streets over from our store. Where is she? He asked, shaking the rain from his long brown curly hair. He was tall and lanky with hazel eyes and a kind smile. He was one of the most easygoing people I knew. He had been friends with Hedrina since they were kids. He was the only friend she had left. Kitchen. Take her straight home, I instructed. You working today? I already have someone covering my shift. Remind me to bake you something for taking care of her, I told him. He smiled sadly. This is what best friends do. You owe me nothing. I just wish I could do more to help her. Yeah, so do we, Helena murmured as she peered out the front window, watching the storm. Roger didn't waste any more time, heading straight for the back. A minute later, he was making his way toward the front, supporting Hedrina. Normally, she would have put up a fight and tried not to go or gotten onto Roger for missing work because he was taking care of her. None of that happened this time. She simply let him guide her out of the store and down the sidewalk to his waiting black pickup truck. Helena and I watched him drive away. We sighed in sync, then went about getting the shop ready to open. I flipped the closed sign on the front door to open. Moonfall, the name of our store and our last name, had been a part of Melancholy for generations. Our coven of the Tides, first came into being back in the late 1700s. Since then, we'd been selling spells and magic remedies to the residents. All of them knew our secret and kept it from any outsiders who passed through. The few who didn't want to believe in magic still came to us for my baked goods, or the handmade soaps, teas, and candles Helena created, or for Hedrina's artistic talents. As Helena busied herself with restocking the shelves and updating the list of spells we offered, I took a moment to let my gaze wander the shop. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling behind the main counter. Glass display cases housed silver artifacts and tools needed for the craft, as well as other enchanted items. More cases sat in the middle of the store, filled with various crystals valuable and dangerous to keep with the other crystals beneath the weather mirror. 2 floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stood to the left of the store, filled from top to bottom with the latest gardening tips, meditation techniques, some of my cookbooks, and anything else we decided seemed interesting enough to sell. Various ingredients dotted the counter, as did the tea setup, where we brewed fresh samples every day. The soaps and candles were arranged near spa treatments Helena had finished creating last week. With the weather turning colder, they'd been selling extremely fast. The bundles we put them in made great gifts. When my gaze reached the paintings hanging above the shelves and displays, my heart sank. A few years ago, Hedrina's paintings had been full of life and color. The fantastical themed landscapes of Melancholy were bought often. Watching her paint then had been a sight. She hardly ever held the brush, but let her magic, her innermost being, create the image on the canvas. The paintings decorating our walls now had hardly any color in them at all. They were grays and blacks, specks of blue or red here and there, but barely enough to count. The skies were overcast, and storms raged on the horizon. Waves crashed viciously against the rocky coastline and bashed the overlook where our family home resided. Some days I worried she'd never be happy again. We'd never truly have our sister back. Everything we did that night, maybe it had all been for nothing. Hey, stop it right now, Helena said as she handed me a tissue. I sniffed hard and kept my back to her as I took it. I'm not doing anything. Yeah, okay. So you're not beating yourself up again for what's going on with Rena? I glanced at the depressing paintings again. How can I not? Helena spun me around to face her and looked at me intently. Her hair stuck up at odd angles as it dried, but on her it worked. It always worked. We didn't know what it would do to her. We were trying to save her life, remember? She would have died. I just can't help but think that if we'd stopped for a second and paid attention before it got that bad. I couldn't hold back the sorrow any longer. Tears streamed down my cheeks as Helena hugged me. We thought she was depressed, she whispered. There were no signs she was being tormented by a damned demon, or we never would have performed the spell. We would have found a way to help her sooner. No matter how many times I tried to forget that awful night, it stayed with me. Every detail on vivid display in my mind. Coming home with Helena to find the house quiet, too quiet. Hedrina used to blare music when she was home alone, but not that time. We'd gone upstairs to find the bathroom door partially open, with our sister lying on the floor in a pool of blood. She'd slit her wrists and left us a crimson-dotted note that said she couldn't handle the voice in her head anymore. There'd been no pulse, but her spirit lingered. Taking her quickly cooling body downstairs to the kitchen, We'd laid her on the table, bound her wounds the best we could, then performed a spell that would return a spirit to its human body. She'd lost a lot of blood, and we'd altered the spell to keep her alive while we rushed her to the hospital. Her spirit had crashed back into her body. She'd woken up long enough to ask us why. Then, we were on our way to the hospital. It was only later that night when we realized what we'd done. We hadn't just saved her life. We damned her to be stuck with a demon woven around her soul for the rest of her days. Any attempt to separate them now meant killing Hedrina. This was our punishment, watching our sister live in torment. There has to be a way to split the demon from her, I said as I dried my eyes. I'm not giving up. Are you? Not even close. Good, then pull yourself together, sis. We'll get through this mess if we stay positive. I laughed and shook my head. Did you eat one of the muffins? Nope, why? Nothing, just always amazes me how you never run out of optimism. She beamed at me and went to the set of stairs that led to our office on the second floor. While she grabbed the cash drawer, I propped open the front door and stepped outside. The air was chilly, but the rain was nothing more than a drizzle now. I picked up the sign we put out on the sidewalk and propped it up a few feet away from the front door. I waved at the cars driving by. Very few new storms like these were caused by Hedrina. The clouds were breaking up though, so Roger probably did what he did best and calmed her down. I turned to go back inside and spotted the oldest man in Melancholy heading my way, his shiny black cane tapping on the concrete. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins." His bald head was covered by a tweed-patterned flat cap. A perfectly groomed white beard graced the rest of his face, hanging to his chest. He'd been a professor of physics a long time ago, and had lived in Melancholy all his life. He, like everyone else, knew what we were. And unlike most people who accepted it, he flat out refused to believe magic existed. "Morning, young lady," he replied as he approached. "Quite the storm we had this morning." "Yes, the weather mirror shows a much clearer afternoon though," I informed him with a wink. He harumphed as he neared the shop. His knees appeared to be giving him a hard time. The man was entering his 70s, but didn't let his arthritis stop him from walking everywhere. Better than the old man driving. "You know, Helena came up with a new herbal remedy for that arthritis of yours," I told him as he walked around the sign and me, and kept on going. "And I made a fantastic batch of muffins this morning." That stopped him short. "Muffins, you say?" "Blueberry. One of your favorites, I believe. Even added a little bit of..." He held up his cane, his dark green eyes narrowed. "Don't say it, unless you don't want me to eat one. You know I'm a sucker for your baking. Let's just leave it at that." I mimed zipping my mouth shut, then waved him into the shop. Helena greeted him with her usual bubbly self, and I pointed to the muffins on the left. Those had the optimism in them. Helena nodded and rang up Mr. Jenkins as they started a conversation that would last a solid 20 minutes. As the clouds parted and a bit of warm sunlight streamed through, I turned around to head back inside. "Hadley." "Morning, Sarah," I called to my friend as she hurried to me. "Care for some breakfast?" She took hold of my arm and pulled me into the store, worry creasing her brow. Her blonde hair was messy from rushing here. "I came by to give you some friendly advice." "About what?" I asked, confused. "You might want to stick around the shop today. Or maybe at home. Don't go anywhere else in town." "What are you talking about?" "Why?" She wrung her hands and bounced on the balls of her feet as Mr. Jenkins managed to drag himself away from Helena and walked out the door. He tipped his hat to Sarah and whistled as he left, happily eating the second half of his muffin. "Morning, Sarah," Helena said. "Morning. Look, do me a favor and keep your sister in the shop." Helena blinked. Her smile faltered. Okay. Can I ask why we're putting her under house arrest?" Sarah went to Helena and whispered something in her ear. I crossed my arms, annoyed as Helena gasped and clapped a hand to her mouth. "Right?" Sarah said, her brow shooting up. "Hadley, you're not leaving the store today. "Oh, come on, what are you two up to?" "Nothing. Nothing at all," my sister stated firmly. "Just trust us. We need to do some recon first with this one." I had no idea what they were talking about, but then Sarah was leaving the shop, saying she had to get to work at the local bank. I frowned at her until she was out of sight. Then I turned to stare at my sister and waited. "Well?" "Nope, not saying a word. Trust me. It's better this way, at least for now." I rolled my eyes and said I was going back to the kitchen. If I was going to be stuck here all day, I might as well bake something. Chapter 2. Hadley. We made it through the day with Helena only breaking 2 vials and tripping over her own feet once. I loved her to death, but she was the clumsiest person in town. Around 4:30 she told me to go ahead and head home, and she'd close up shop. "Straight home," she added as I gathered my baking notes and heavy blue cardigan. "I mean it. Straight home. No detours, no doing anything else. I'll be there in a couple of hours." Fine, whatever you say, Mom," I muttered. Once I was out the door and down the sidewalk, I decided I was not going to go home just yet. I hadn't eaten anything but samples of new cakes all day, and I was starving. I checked in with Roger this afternoon to see how Rena was holding up. They'd been hanging out making fun of whatever soap operas were on TV. Rena had no more episodes, and had said she was going to try and just sleep for a bit. He was going to stay until one of us made it home. I texted him again, just to be sure the situation was still under control. Once he said it was, I ducked into the Lighthouse Cafe and took my usual table by the windows overlooking the town square garden. Mike, the owner, brought me a glass of water and Moscato without my asking. "Evening, Hadley. What are you feeling tonight?" "Let's do the seafood chowder," I said, not even having to look at the menu. "Bit chilly outside." "Yeah, winter seems to be closing in pretty fast this year. Hardly October, and already feels like December. I'll get the order put in for you." "Thanks." I glanced around the cafe, and although every face was familiar, I saw no one that made red flags shoot up in my mind. Who had Sarah seen this morning that made her freak out? I might not be as friendly with everyone as Helena was, but I didn't have an open feud with anyone either. Or hate anyone in town. Shrugging at Sarah's overreacting and Helena being dramatic, I flipped open my blue-flowered notebook and sipped on my wine as I jotted down new ideas or scratched out old ones. I mumbled under my breath as I did it, working out some fresh concepts to bring to the shop for the later fall months. A shadow fell over my table, and I waited for the person to walk by, but the shadow remained. Flustered already, because the recipe I was trying to come up with wasn't quite clicking, I looked up to tell the person to kindly move when the pen dropped from my fingers. I gulped. "Hadley. I thought I'd stop by your table and say hi. Nice to see some things never change." I had to be seeing things. I blinked, but the man standing there didn't go away. A heavy silence had fallen over the cafe. I didn't have to look to know we were currently the center of everyone's attention. "Edric," I managed to breathe. "I'm back in town. Thought about swinging by the shop, but didn't want to bother you while you were at work." My mind was a complete blank, and whatever words were trying to come out were lodged in my throat. Edric, 6 foot tall, lean Edric looked as good as he had when I last saw him 2 years ago. I'd just turned 24. That was a little over 2 years ago. He didn't know I'd seen him, of course, but I had. His short black hair was a bit on the messy side today, but those dimples were precisely as I remembered them, and made me melt all over again. Those brown eyes threatened to suck me in. He took a step closer to the table. "Hadley, I'd like to talk to you if you're not busy. I think there are a few things we need to sort out. Been a while too. It might be nice to catch up." The shock at seeing him in the cafe evaporated, only to be replaced by sheer panic. I snapped my notebook shut, threw a 20 on the table to pay for the food that I wasn't going to eat, then booked it out of the cafe without saying another word. Edric called after me. I put my head down and ran along the sidewalk, heading out of town. I followed the paved road until it turned to gravel, then I slowed. I chanced to glance back. He hadn't followed me. I finally tugged my cardigan on and pulled it tight around me as I marched home. The wind whipped my hair around. I yanked the black and blue tie from my head since it wasn't serving its purpose, and shoved it in my pocket. Why hadn't Sarah or Helena simply told me who was in town? Why was he even here? He was supposed to be in London living a new life with his dream job and new friends, and I'd have thought by now perhaps a new girlfriend that wasn't a witch who was putting his life in danger. He was not supposed to be here. Waves crashed against the rocky shore, beating against the coastline as my emotions battered every inch of me. I never planned to see him again, and yet here he was. I glared over the water and toward the horizon. The sun was covered once again by a large bank of clouds as evening closed in. By the time I reached home, the porch lights were on, and I took a second to soak in the sight that calmed me on most of my bad days. Just not this one, apparently. Our old Victorian home had been given another coat of paint this year, a pale blue since I was the one who chose the color. Each window and door was framed with white trim that never cracked or became dirty. Magic was great for home maintenance. Up top was the widow's walk where my sisters and I spent many a night with a bottle or two of wine, laughing and casting spells into the night. Watching the moon and stars, trying to figure out where our lives would lead us. If only we'd known how dark our paths would have turned, would we have done anything differently? Probably not, I muttered to the air. There was no going back and changing what happened or the choices we made. Slowly, I walked from the gravel drive to the stone pathway leading beneath the white arch that marked the front gardens. They were surrounded by wrought iron fences with vines and various types of foliage growing through and around them. Most of the plants had already turned brown because of the season. The beds needed to be worked before it became too cold, but I hadn't found the time to do it. The front steps creaked beneath my boots, then I was on the wraparound front porch that gave us a perfect view of the cove and the lighthouse beyond. Wind chimes clanged around me, warding off evil spirits and protecting our home from dark magic. Too bad the chimes hadn't worked against demons, but nothing could keep those out except sheer force of will. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside the cozy interior of the home I'd known all my life. Lamps, sitting on wooden tables filled with trinkets collected over the years, lit the large foyer. I hung my cardigan and purse on the coat rack, then kicked out of my boots, adding to the pile of shoes always by the front door. The plush rug beneath my feet muted my steps as I moved further into the house. A fire was going in the living room hearth, but the plaid couches were empty. The den was also empty, the light off. Steps sounded on the stairs just beyond the entrance to the den. Roger appeared at the bottom. Hedrina just fell asleep, he told me quietly. Didn't expect you home so soon. Changed my mind about dinner, I lied. No more episodes? Nope, she was back to her typical Rena self. He shoved his hands in his pockets as he glanced upstairs, concern furrowing his brow. She's worried it's getting stronger. At least she tells you this shit. He shrugged. She doesn't want you to worry more than you already do. I'm supposed to worry. I'm her sister, I snapped. I know that. He laid a comforting hand on my shoulder. You guys will figure it out. I wanted to shout and scream that for 2 years we had tried, but there was nothing we could do. The hope in his eyes stopped me from falling apart. Haven't given up yet. You can head home. Thanks for staying with her all day. Just wish it was like old times, he said, his voice sad. Night, Hadley. He left the house, the front door closing with a soft click behind him. Walking past the stairs, I entered the kitchen and made myself a sandwich to stop my stomach from grumbling. I hopped up on the counter as I ate it. The whitewashed cabinets always made the room feel so much bigger. The large solid wood table that had been in this house as long as I could remember was off to the right beneath the twisted beechwood chandelier. Beyond the table, a set of glass doors led to the greenhouse attached to the rear of the house. I reflected on the good memories I had in every room of this house, but the happiness didn't last long. Edric's face appeared in my mind's eye. I tossed the rest of my food, unable to finish it. I had a ton of good memories in this house involving him, too. Far too many to ever simply forget. I'd done an excellent job at burying them until he showed up. Had been doing fine convincing myself I did the right thing, pushing him away when I did. There had been no other option to ensure he was safe. I climbed the steps to the first landing, then up the second set leading to the middle floor, passing numerous photographs that covered every available bit of wall space. 3 bedrooms and a full bath were on this floor. The large attic 1 floor up was where we did our spell work and potions. The very last set of narrow stairs led to the widow's walk. Quietly, I crept down the hall to Hedrina's room and cracked her door open. She laid facing the door. Her eyes were closed, and she was breathing evenly, fast asleep. I watched her for a couple of minutes, until I was satisfied she was all right. At the end of the hall was my room. The left side had a sloping ceiling on either side of the bay window. Mom had added that feature a long time ago. The view was incredible, but now when I looked at that bench, my heart ached. How many times had I sat in that very spot with Edric as he held me close? As we kissed into the late hours of the night. He'll go away, I told myself as I grabbed sweatpants and a t-shirt. He'll get the message and just go away. You won't have to see him again. Even as I thought it, I knew if he was back in town, he wasn't just going to try and say hi once, then leave it alone. Edric came here for a reason, probably to tell me he had moved on. My chest ached at the thought of him with another woman, but I'd done it to myself. I doubted he came all this way after 2 long years, to finally tell me off for leaving it the way we did. Until he said whatever he came to, he'd be in Melancholy. As I passed by my dresser, my eyes landed on the wooden box near the back. A fine layer of dust covered it. The last time I opened it was, hell, I couldn't even remember. With a shaking hand, I lifted the lid. I was greeted by the last photograph I had of Edric and me along the coast. Waves crashed against the rocks behind us. We were laughing, but I couldn't remember what about. Beneath the picture was a silver locket with the changing phases of the moon engraved on the front. The back was inscribed with the words, "Like every phase of the moon, my love for you will never wane." It was cheesy, but goddess did I love it. Had loved it. He could say some of the most over-the-top lines, and somehow coming from him, they didn't sound ridiculous or like they came from a sappy romance movie. They were sincere. Edric had always been a romantic. Not sure why, I scooped up the locket and took it with me into the bathroom. I set it on the counter while I ran a hot bath, dumped a healthy dose of bubbles in it, then slid into the steamy water. When the claw-footed tub was full, I turned the water off and shut my eyes, soaking in the heat. I tried to think about what our next plan should be for Hedrina, but after a while I gave up because all my thoughts kept drifting back to one man in particular. The locket was in reach, and I picked it up. Opening it, I found a tiny picture of his face. He was smiling, and those brown eyes were filled with amusement about something I'd probably done. As I looked at the photograph, my mind wandered to the first time we met. Edric had come to our little town 6 years ago. A few of his friends from college dragged him along for a road trip. They'd said he needed to get out and have some fun. None of them knew that Melancholy was home to my sisters and me, the local witches. They'd wandered into our store. This was when Heather was still around. I'd been in the back baking when this guy came through the kitchen doors looking confused. I wiped my flour-covered hands on my apron. "The shop's out that way, buddy," I said politely. "Think you're a bit lost?" The messy black-haired guy glanced around curiously, then a pair of brown eyes that reminded me of chocolate landed on my face. They widened slightly, then crinkled as he grinned. 2 dimples appeared on his cheeks, and the kitchen became a lot hotter than it had been moments ago. We looked at each other for a solid 30 seconds when he finally cleared his throat. "Sorry, one of the other women sent me back here." I frowned. "She did? Which one?" "I didn't catch a name," he said and took a step closer. "Really long curly red hair. Really long." "Heather," I muttered. "She's my older sister." Why did she send you back here? She was handing out samples, cakes, and muffins and things. I asked who made them, and she told me to check the kitchen. This wasn't the first time Heather had pulled a stunt like this. She was always trying to set me up with random guys. Most of the time, they were idiots or ended up being full of themselves and rude. I wasn't sure what to make of this guy yet. Well, this is the kitchen, I said. Then you made everything in the shop? Yep. From scratch, he asked, genuinely sounding amazed. I couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, all of it's from scratch. It's kinda what I do. I almost said that and being a witch, but figured that wasn't something I should tell him in the first 5 minutes of our meeting. It's just cakes and stuff. No need to look so impressed. You don't understand. I can't bake or cook anything. At all. My roommates have forbidden me from going anywhere near the stove in our townhouse. He chuckled. The last time I tried to make anything, it caught on fire. I found myself grinning along with him. Maybe you shouldn't be in my kitchen, just in case. I'll go if you want, he said, still smiling, but he seemed hesitant. He rubbed the back of his neck. I just wanted to pay my compliments to the baker. This is some good shit, I mean stuff. Good stuff. He was at the door when I called him. Hey, I didn't catch your name. Edric Hall, he replied, turning around. I didn't catch yours either. Hadley Moonfall. He smiled wider. Hadley. A pleasure to meet you. I'll be sure to buy a dozen cakes on my way out for the group and all, he added in a rush. Not that I'd eat 12 cakes by myself. We've all done it at least once. He nodded. Sure we have. He started to leave again but stopped. Would you want to grab coffee? Or dinner or ice cream or something whenever you get off work? Ice cream would be fun. There's a really good place in town. Great, then I'll see you around 5 or so. I almost said yeah, then on impulse asked, would you like to hang out for the rest of the day? Maybe I can show you a thing or two about baking. I'd like to watch you bake, watch you move, he said, then cleared his throat and cursed. I'd like to stay, he finally said as we both laughed. That'd be fun. If you're sure you won't get in trouble with the boss. What boss? Your sister? Yeah, she's not the boss. I went back to kneading the dough I'd been working on. We all own this place. I'm my own boss. What? That's incredible. How old are you? I chuckled. That's something you ask every girl when you first meet her. I teased, loving how his eyes grew wide until he realized I was joking. And I'm 20 if you must know. Shit, and you already own a store with your sisters. To be fair, it's been passed down from our parents and grandparents. But still, he insisted as he came closer, that's awesome. Must be nice. I get to do what I love every day. What about you? Me? I'm boring. I smiled at him as my hands kept working the dough. That I highly doubt. The memory faded as a knock came at the bathroom door. Hadley. Looked like Helena was home. How long had I been in the tub? The water had gotten chilly, and with a snap of my fingers I worked on warming it back up, then added more bubbles. You can come in if you want. The door opened. She poked her head in, then grinned. Nothing like a good old bubble bath. She hopped up on the counter as she messed up her short hair with her fingers. Boy, it was a long day. Yeah, it was, I mused quietly, turning over the silver locket I still clutched in my hand. What's that? I considered saying nothing, but she already knew Edric was in town. No point in lying to her and pretending he hadn't found me. I let the locket fall from my hand, holding it aloft with the chain wrapped around my fingers. The pendant glimmered in the bathroom lights. Helena glanced at the ceiling, probably to stop herself from giving anything away. What made you get that out? Haven't seen it in years. Oh, I was feeling sentimental after Edric found me at Mike's place, I muttered. Helena sighed. Look, I would have told you. I held up my hand to stop her. I get why you didn't want me to know, but you should have just told me. I hoped he was just passing through for the night. Or that I'd get a chance to talk to him first and see what he was up to. I shot her a look. She continued, to ease the craziness that's bound to happen. He's here to see me. I gathered the locket back into my palm and sunk lower into the water. He won't leave until he talks to me. I know it, and I'm not sure I want to have that conversation. Any conversation. But if he saw you tonight, that means he talked to you, right? She asked, and I cringed, sinking low enough for the water to cover my chin. Hadley, please tell me you didn't just walk out on the guy. The bathroom door opened again, saving me from answering. Hedrina walked in, yawning and rubbing her face. What guy? She asked once she stopped yawning. She looked better than she had this morning, just a little tired. She seemed pretty comfortable in her yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. You meet someone? She asked, planting herself on the step stool in the corner. Not someone new, Helena informed her. Edric's in town. What? Hedrina exclaimed, eyes wide. And you walked out on him? I didn't walk out on him, I argued, but they looked at me with the same look of disbelief. All right, fine, I panicked. He came up to me, and I completely and utterly panicked. Happy? No. You need to talk to him, Hedrina insisted. Why? There's nothing to talk about. Ah, yeah, there is. Helena crossed her arms, nodding as I shook my head. He came all the way back here to see you. You can't just not hear him out. And no slamming any more doors in his face either. I grunted, annoyed. We said all we had to say over 2 years ago, remember? Maybe, or maybe this is your chance to tell him you went after him to London and chickened out. Or that you purposely pushed him out of your life, because you were scared for his safety. We know why you did it, and to be honest, I still think you overreacted. Hedrina beamed at me as I scowled. What? Just saying. I did not overreact, I argued sternly. And it doesn't matter that I went. You both know what I saw. He was happy, which is why I left and came home. End of story. Can we stop talking about it now? I set the locket on the edge of the tub and started popping bubbles in aggravation. He's probably here to tell me he's got a new girlfriend or something. He's not an asshole who would do that to you. I bet he's here because he misses you, Helena said quietly. Can you please not be stupid about this? He's here in Melancholy. He could be anywhere else in the world, but he came here. She's got a point, Hedrina chimed in. Do yourself a favor and talk to him? Actually talk to him. I let my head fall back to the rim of the tub. I'll think about it. Now can we drop it? Helena swooned. It's so romantic. Traveling all the way here to win you back, break down those walls of ice you've built around your heart. Hedrina and I exchanged a glance, then burst out laughing. Most likely, he's going to finally tell me exactly what he couldn't say when I forced him away. Probably been pissed off this whole time. By the goddess, you're hopeless, I added. How is it you don't have a boyfriend yet? Helena slid off the counter and headed for the door. Haven't been lucky. You hungry, Rena? I could eat. She followed Helena out of the bathroom after they both gave me another doe-eyed glance. Their laughter followed them down the hall as I returned to my thinking of what I was going to do about Edric. That's easy, I told myself quietly. Avoid him at all costs. To do that, I'd have to stay home or hide. That wouldn't do any good. It wasn't like he didn't know where I lived. The more I thought of Edric and remembered our times together, the more my mind drifted further back to when our eldest sister was with us. To think, Heather had been the reason Edric and I ended up together in the first place. Thinking of her made me wonder how Heather fell so far so quickly. I was about to drain the water and join my sisters downstairs when the wind gusted, rattling the window and the panes. I sat up, wondering if we were in for a storm tonight, when a bird crashed into the glass. I yelped as the large crow cawed and flapped its wings, beating itself against the hard surface over and over as if attempting to break in. Blood spattered across the panes as it continued to flail, Suddenly, it fell away just as suddenly as it appeared. With the bird out of the way, I had a clear view of the dark sky and the moon. A moon with a ring around it. That was never a good sign. I pulled the plug for the tub, then climbed out, drying as fast as I could. I tugged on my clothes, then hurried downstairs to the kitchen. Helena asked me what I was doing as I slipped into my muck boots, grabbed my coat from where it was hanging by the back door, and rushed through the greenhouse, then outside into the yard. I scoured the grass for the crow. The door banged shut as my sisters followed me out. "What are you doing?" Helena asked. "Going for a stroll, or something?" "Crow," I said in answer, still searching for the animal. "What?" Hedrina stood beside me. "Did you say crow?" "Yeah, it threw itself into the bathroom window. Then I saw the ring around the moon, I just thought." A chill rushed down my back. I told myself it was probably from the cold since my hair was still dripping wet, and the temperature had plummeted since the sun went down. I shook my head and shoved my cold hands in my pockets. I guess I let my mind wander too much. Maybe I dozed off and imagined the crow. Never mind. Let's go back inside. I started to walk away, then stopped when I noticed Hedrina had stiffened. "Rena." She was motionless. I wondered if she was having another episode. It was rare for her to have two in a day, but it had happened in the past. I was going to lead her inside when she pointed to the ground by the foundation of the house. Helena gasped and clapped a hand over her mouth. I crept forward and crouched in front of the broken and battered body of the crow. "Hadley," Helena whispered. "It's nothing," I told her sternly. "Just a coincidence." I picked up the crow by its broken wing and moved toward the edge of the yard and the cliffside. I looked at it long and hard, remembering the tattoo of a crow that had marked Heather's back, and how she used their feathers in most of her spells. Or how she would talk to them. She'd always had a talent for sensing what animals were feeling and thinking. Communicated with them in a way. Crows had been her favorite for some reason. It was a common enough bird, but since the day Heather left Melancholy, not a single one had been spotted. Not until tonight. I tossed the crow over the cliff. Then motioned my sisters back inside, taking one last look at the moon, then went with them, locking the back door behind me. I added another layer of warding with the snap of my fingers. Just in case.
Chapter 3. Edric. The box of half-eaten muffins sat on the chest of drawers in my room at the local bed and breakfast. I picked up another one and broke it in half. I didn't have to ask to know Hadley baked these with her usual spunk and secret ingredient of choice for today. From the way my spirits were high, despite how this evening went, I'd have guessed the secret ingredient was a touch of optimism. Too bad she hadn't eaten one herself. Maybe our conversation would have gone differently. Or we might have actually had one. Happy wasn't the mood I'd been in when I landed this afternoon in Maine. I hadn't planned to have anything she baked, but Glinda, the woman who owned this B&B, sold them at the front desk. On impulse, I'd bought a package of muffins baked fresh that morning. A voice in the back of my head said to remember why I was here, and throw the rest of them out. My heart gave a twinge, and I grimaced, rubbing at my chest. Maybe coming here hadn't been a good idea, but what choice did I have? None, that's what. Not one. I flipped aimlessly through the channels on the small TV until I landed on some late-night talk show. Keeping the volume low, I set the remote aside and lounged against the headboard, working on my plan for tomorrow. I had rehearsed what I would tell Hadley, spent the last 2 weeks, and the plane ride over working on the exact words that would hopefully bring me closure. After 2 years, one would have thought I'd have moved on from her, but something held me back. The last time we spoke, all we'd done was yell at each other, and then she slammed a door in my face and used her magic against me. The next day, I'd flown to London. That was it. No texts. No phone calls. Nothing. All I needed was to understand why, and prove to myself we were better apart. The words had been on the tip of my tongue, but instead of getting to say any of it, she ran away from me. What do you expect? I muttered. You left and never looked back. So much had happened in the years we were together. I'd been there for her when Heather turned on her family. That night was one I remembered, no matter how hard I'd tried to forget how close I'd come to losing her then. I'd reached the house just as Heather erupted in a fury and nearly took Hadley out. I'd found her outside on the path, her face bleeding and her body trembling. The windows had been blown out of the house, and Heather had simply vanished. The next day, Hadley had tried to tell me to leave, attempted to convince me her life was too dangerous, but I stuck around and proved to her I could handle her being a witch. I loved her, and that meant all of her, including the magic part. She'd given in, and for the next 2 years, everything was great. Until it wasn't. Something had changed, but no matter how many times I attempted to figure out what it was, or what I might have done wrong, I had never figured it out. Hadley had started to push me away. She'd stopped calling me. When I went to the store, she'd tell me I had to go. Even my visits to the house became few and far between, until I finally asked her if she was finished with our relationship. Though the TV at the bed and breakfast was on, a set of different voices filled my ears. I shut my eyes, going back to the night that changed our lives forever. Hadley was ready to storm back inside and slam the door in my face, but I caught her arm. Just talk to me, I begged. What is going on? You've been acting weird, and you're avoiding me. Did something happen? Witch-related? Is that what this is all about? She tugged on a lock of hair, like she always did when she was worried or afraid. No, all right. This has nothing to do with my being a witch. Why don't I believe that? I kept hold of her arm and pulled her closer to me, trying to make her look me in the eye. This is exactly how you acted after the incident with Heather, I whispered. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. Look at me. Her gaze flicked to mine, then away so fast I nearly missed it. I'm sorry, but this just isn't what I want anymore. And you already told me you were offered a job in London. That I'm going to turn down. I don't want to live in London. You're saying you want to stay in Melancholy. She laughed, but it was forced, and then she did tear herself away from me. Hotshot accountant, the smartest man I know, is going to stick around small-town Maine for what? I thought that much was obvious. I thought about the ring I had tucked away in my small studio apartment. I'd gotten it just before she started acting strange. I should have brought it with me tonight, but that would have probably made all this worse. I love you. I want to be where you are. You're just going to give up your future for me. For a life of uncertainty and danger. I frowned at her choice of words. Then something did happen. She threw her head back with a frustrated yell. No, nothing happened. You're just not the man for me. I don't think you ever were. The words were like a slap to the face. I nearly let my hurt get the better of me. You're lying, I whispered, and she tensed. Me staying was always the plan, and you know it. You're the only family I have, the only family I want. You and your sisters and that store. This is where you have made your life, and I'm willing to stay. For good. I reached for her hands, but she backed away from me, shaking her head. Why are you doing this? It's what's best for both of us. Take the job in London. Live your life. Find someone who isn't a witch, and have a normal life. Normal is overrated, I said quietly. She backed away again and reached for the front door. It's over, Edric. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I think it's been over for a while for me. I just didn't know how to say it. Tears floated in her eyes as she squared her shoulders, and this time did look me in the eye. Don't come back. Hadley, I tried, but she snapped her fingers, and I found myself standing at the end of the garden path on the other side of the fence. When I tried to rush back to the front door, I found my way blocked by an invisible wall. I banged on it and yelled until I was hoarse. That following morning, I'd packed up my apartment, got on a plane, and never looked back. I'd spent the whole night calling her and her sisters, but none of them answered. I never knew the real reason she sent me away. That was about to change. For 2 years, it had been gnawing away at me, preventing me from getting over the witch I fell in love with. I should have come back sooner. That was my first mistake. I waited too damn long. But each time I thought of flying home, the whirlwind of hurt, annoyance, and anger stopped me from getting on that plane. I tried to date other women. I attempted to move on, but no matter who I went out with, or who my new friends hooked me up with, none of them were Hadley. They never would be. If I could understand why she pushed me away, then maybe I'd be able to get on with my life. My plane had landed just this afternoon. I'd planned to find her tomorrow morning, but then I'd walked by the Lighthouse Cafe where we'd gone so many times, and there she was, sitting at our table. She'd been nose-deep in a notebook, as always, working on more recipes, I had no doubt. I couldn't count the number of hours we shared in the kitchen at the shop, or at her house, experimenting with new ideas. Without even realizing what I'd been doing, I was inside the cafe, standing at the table, waiting for her to look up and see me. Then she did, and all my well-laid plans went out the window. Her favorite color appeared to still be blue. Those eyes, as blue as the waters of the cove, hadn't changed one bit. If I looked too long, I'd end up getting lost in them like I used to do. She never was good at hiding her emotions, so many swirled in those depths during our brief exchange. Her soft brown hair I used to run my fingers through was longer. It looked good on her. Everything about Hadley looked good. As I ate the last bit of muffin, I reached for my wallet on the nightstand and pulled out a very worn photograph of us. Tomorrow was a new day. I came here to understand once and for all what went wrong and to not let her have the last word, not this time. Chapter 4. Edric. My thermos cup warmed my hands. I put the lid on and smiled at Glinda. Thanks for this. You sure you don't want me to whip you up something? She asked. Nope. I've got a busy day ahead of me. It's good seeing you back here, she said with a smile and patted my cheek. Hadley hasn't been the same since you left. Guilt ate away at me with her words. That was immediately followed by frustration that I was the one to feel guilty. Hadley pushed me away. She forced me out of her life. I swallowed back the bitter emotions and forced a smile. I'm just sorry I waited so long to come back. Better late than never. Then she's not seeing anyone? I asked, not even sure why. I bumped into her last night, but we didn't exactly talk. Glinda laughed as she bustled around her cozy, warm kitchen, working on breakfast for the rest of her guests. She took off on you. Something like that, yeah. As far as I know, that girl has stayed single. Not been on one date. She keeps herself busy with her baking, and her sisters, of course. Glinda started on a fresh batch of waffles, as she shrugged. You ask me, she's been waiting for you to come back. I could tell she missed you, the poor thing. Was tearing her up inside not to have you around. Mind telling me why you didn't just come back after she went to London to see you? I had been ready to walk out the door, but stopped at her words. What? When she went to London a couple of months after you left, she said without looking away from her cooking. Was gone for a good 2 weeks. I thought you two were talking it out, but when I asked her, she said your job in London was incredible, and she told you to stay. I could have smacked you for not coming back with her. She waved a spatula at me as she added, still might. Hadley came to London. Why the hell hadn't she talked to me? And now everyone in town thought I was the bad guy because I chose a job over her. I never would have done that, but here was Glinda glaring at me like she was Hadley's grandmother, and I was about to get an ass whooping with that damn spatula. Yeah, things just didn't work out that way. I'll see you later, Glinda. Thanks for the coffee, I said in a rush. Sure thing, hon, and Edric. You best not be here to break that girl's heart all over again. I ground my teeth and nearly said it was the other way around. Hadley had broken my heart, shattered it in fact. I kept my mouth shut and left the house. I stepped out the kitchen door and onto the patio. A pergola covered most of it, and the rest was decorated with various potted plants and fountains. This time of year, the plants were all different shades of mums, and the fountains weren't on since they'd freeze. Back when I first came to Melancholy with my roommates from college, we'd stayed here. Then it had only been for a week. The second time I came by myself and had stayed for 3 weeks. Not that I spent much of that time here. An unexpected smile found its way onto my face as I drank my coffee and exited the backyard, took the stone path around the sizable colonial-style house that had been added to over the years, and out to the main road. That second trip here, I spent most of my time with Hadley. She showed me around all Melancholy. If we weren't out exploring, then I was with her in the back of the shop watching her bake. She attempted to show me a few times, but the lessons never stuck. I finally admitted it was because I was too busy watching her. There had just been something about seeing her bake. The way she moved through a kitchen was magical. And that was back before I understood it really was magic. That instance had led to a very heated session of kissing, until Hedrina had popped into the back for more baked goods. She'd exited with a cackle, yelling at us to get a room. But it was that day when I knew without a doubt I wanted to be with Hadley. Her home was in Melancholy, and since I had no family, no ties to anyone else but her, I decided to stick around. Taking my time, I strolled down the main road, glad to see all the familiar faces and the same shops lining the sidewalks. Most waved at me and smiled. Some gave me a curious gaze. A few glared, and I buried my face in my thermos so I wouldn't return the favor. After what Glinda said, it was clear what Hadley had told everyone after I'd gone. Looked like I was once again the topic of stimulating conversation, though I wasn't so sure it was good things this time around. Hadley and I had been the talk of this small town when I moved to Melancholy. Freshly graduated, I found a job as an accountant outside of here, but not too far away that I didn't mind the drive. It didn't matter, since every day I got to come back to Hadley. For a year, everything was beyond incredible. There were moments when I sensed she was keeping something from me. Her and her sisters. I couldn't count the number of times I'd walk into the kitchen at their shop, and Hadley would look up, startled, and like she was trying to hide something behind her back. Or the times weird things would happen around the shop or their house. Things moving or appearing on their own. The way the weather seemed to be entirely in tune with Hedrina's mood. Then there was the time there were a ton of crows in their garden, hanging around Heather as if that was the most natural thing in the world. When I found the cabinet in the back of the shop, filled with glowing vials and glimmering powders, I'd finally asked Hadley what was going on. She'd said I wouldn't believe her, but she finally admitted she was a witch, as were her sisters. At first, I was confused, but the more I thought about our year together, the more the pieces fell into place. I'd laughed. She looked ready to throw me out until I told her I wasn't laughing at her. I believed her. I might be a logic-based person, but there was always a small part of me that wanted to believe magic existed. And there I was with a witch as a girlfriend. She'd spent hours showing me what she could do. I figured out the mystery to all her recipes. She told me the townspeople were in on the secret, but helped them keep the truth hidden from outsiders, just in case. No one needed a nut job tearing up the town. Our relationship had been great before that moment, but after she genuinely let me into her life, I thought our lives were as close to perfect as they could get. I believed I'd found my soulmate and had been ready to ask her to marry me. Only that never happened. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked across the street. Just a few storefronts down was the sister store. At 7:30, Hadley would already be in the back, baking away. They weren't open yet, but I didn't want to wait until they were. Causing a scene was not why I'd come here. The sound of a tapping cane made me turn. "Mr. Jenkins," I said in greeting as the old man approached. His face was strangely blank as he stopped beside me. "You here to see Hadley?" "I am. There are a few things we need to sort out after so long," I admitted. He nodded, then lifted his cane and smashed it onto my foot. I gasped at the sharp pain, then he did it again. When he missed, he gave up on trying to stab my foot and whacked my shin until I was hobbling around. "You hurt her again, it'll be your head next," he warned, then strolled down the sidewalk whistling. I glowered at his back as I gingerly set my foot down. "All right, Hadley," I muttered, realizing the lies she'd spread about me instead of telling everyone the truth. "No more hiding. No more running." I marched across the street, around the back of the shop, and tried the door. It was unlocked. Slowly, I opened it. The bell tinkling overhead brought back a rush of memories, but I didn't let myself fall into them. The kitchen smelled of blueberries and chocolate. I breathed it in. Man, I'd missed this place. The realization that I was home hit me so hard, I had to stop and catch my breath. Then I reminded myself why I was here. It wasn't to stay. It was so I could understand and move on. Flour, sugar, tins, and various ingredients covered the counters. The cabinet where Hadley kept her secret ingredients was cracked open, giving me a glimpse of the magic held within. The rainbow of shimmering colors brought another smile to my face. I forced it away. As I went a bit further inside, I spotted someone moving around in the storeroom beyond the kitchen. When I saw a hint of blue, I knew it was Hadley. I set my thermos down and waited, not saying a word. "Helena," she called. "About time you got here. Getting your beauty sleep?" I tapped my fingers on the counter, still waiting and keeping quiet. "Helena?" Something shifted out of the way, and then Hadley was muttering under her breath as she stormed into the kitchen. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted at the sight of me. "Edric, you can't be here." "But I am here," I said. "We need to talk." She wiped her hands on her blue and black apron and shook her head. I picked that apron out for her. Matched the hair tie currently holding her brown locks back from her face. Did she even remember? Following my gaze, she glanced at the apron and sighed. That was a yes. "Look, can we not do this here?" she asked. "I have to get the shop ready to open." "The town can wait." "This can't." "There's nothing to talk about," she insisted, but her voice shook. She snapped her fingers, and the oven door opened. She snapped her fingers a second time, and 2 cake pans floated into the air and slid inside the oven. She closed it herself and set the timer. "I miss this," I whispered without thinking. Hadley froze, and her breath seemed to catch. "I said all I needed to say years ago. I don't know what else to tell you, so you please leave. I'm asking you nicely." "Going to use your magic on me again?" "You gave me no choice that night," she snapped, gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her standing. "You were supposed to move on." "I did." "Bullshit." She flinched, then laughed nervously. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Glinda told me you haven't been on a date with anyone since I left." "That woman," she mumbled. "She's wrong, all right. I have. Lots of dates with lots of men," she exclaimed. "Which is all of them. See? It was just, I didn't want to be with a normal guy anymore. I told you. And you should have found yourself a girl by now. Sure, there are plenty of them in London ready to fawn over you," she said bitterly, as she slammed a cookbook onto the table with her magic. With a wiggle of her fingers, she flipped through the pages without touching them. Lots of pretty girls. Pretty blondes with long legs and cute little asses. I blinked at her, then burst out laughing. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Your new life in London, what else?" I walked to the counter she was leaning on and tugged the cookbook away from her. "Let's talk about London," I said as I shut the book, then held it out of reach. "Why does everyone think I'm the one who left you, and not the other way around?" She made a grab for the book, but I simply raised my arm, so it was far over her head. She could have taken it from me with magic, but held back. "No idea what you're talking about." "You sure about that?" "Glinda threatened to beat me with a spatula, and Mr. Jenkins about took my leg off on my way here, because they think I'm going to hurt you again." I waited for her to come clean, but she only bit her lip and looked away. Slowly, I lowered the cookbook and asked, "Why didn't you tell me you were in London?" Those blue eyes latched onto my gaze, and I saw the fragile dam holding back a tidal wave of emotions. What difference would it have made? It was like someone sucked the air out of the room. Time came to a screeching. The book fell from my fingers and landed on the counter with a loud thud, sending up a puff of flour in the process. What difference? I repeated. If I had known you were there, then we could have talked. About what? I told you, I said what I had to say that night. God, you're such a liar, I snapped, and she hunched her shoulders. You pushed me away. You'd been doing it for weeks. Why? What did I do to suddenly change your mind about us? About everything. Just go away, she pleaded. Please. No, not this time, and don't you dare snap those fingers, I said in a rush when she looked ready to do just that, which would probably send me outside. I want the truth, Hadley. What changed? Nothing, she yelled and turned her back to me. You left and I went after you. I did, but then I saw you there, and you were happy. You had a good life and friends, and I thought if you saw me, then I'd just end up dragging you right back here with me. I couldn't do that to you. So, you didn't even give me a choice. She shrugged, then angrily tugged the hairband from her head. I shouldn't have gone, but I had to make sure you were okay. And you decided that for yourself, did you? Without even talking to me. You were smiling and having a good time. And those girls, she whispered, I assumed your life was working out for the best. The aggravation I held onto these last couple of years grew as the truth slowly came out. You shouldn't have assumed anything. Yeah, the job is good, and the people I met are nice, but it's not home. None of it will ever be home because you're not there. I can't be. And I'm okay with that. I shut my eyes, begging for patience, then walked around the table so I could face her again. I took firm hold of her hands and looked into her eyes. I should have come back sooner. Hell, I never should have left, but I was stupid. Now I'm back, and I want the truth, all of it. Why did you push me away? Stop asking me that, she said and tried to get around me, but I wasn't letting her run, not this time. Edric, you don't understand. Then help me too. Talk to me. You used to do that once upon a time. Tell me everything. Some things aren't that easy. She shook her head, sending her long brown hair flying as her gaze darted wildly around the room, anywhere but my face. I have my reasons, just leave it at that. Now go away. Why? Because I said so. I shook my head and moved in closer. That's not a reason. Don't make me zap your ass out of here. If you really wanted to do that, you would have already. Why? She chewed on her bottom lip, then hung her head. I can't. Yes, you can. You just won't? Why did you push me away? Because I love you, all right, she shouted as she looked at me. I freaking love you, and the only way to keep you safe was to get you as far away from me as I could. So that's what I did, and then I missed you so much it was killing me. But then I went to London, and you looked happy, so I decided not to be that girl who disrupts your life because I'm the one who messed it up in the first place. I messed this up, she said, waving her hand between us. That's why. Happy now. I haven't been happy in 2 damned years, I muttered, then pulled her close and put my lips on hers. As I kissed her, the temperature in the kitchen rose. Suddenly she was dragging me even closer, fisting her hands in my t-shirt. I wound one arm around her waist and lifted her off her feet, setting her on the nearest counter I could find. I kept expecting her to lean back and smack me, but she deepened the kiss. Her arms ended up wrapped around my neck as we grew lost in each other, trying to make up lost time. Then she stilled, and the moment was over. She pushed against my chest and hopped off the counter, shaking her head. No, you can't be here. You have to go. I smirked and arched a brow. Really? You don't understand. That was nice beyond nice, she murmured, giving herself a shake as if to remind herself of something. Just please go. Leave Melancholy today. That is not happening. I took a step toward her, and she grabbed a handful of flour and threw it at me. I sneezed as it covered part of my face, then wiped it from my mouth. Seriously? I'm trying to keep you safe. She raised her hand to throw more flour at me when the bell tinkled over the back door. We turned to find Helena waltzing in. She had been in the middle of saying something, but froze at the sight of Hadley and me. Well, this isn't what I expected to find, she mused and grinned. Edric, good to see you. She came over and hugged me. She and Hedrina had become my family while I was living here. In essence, she was my sister, and I'd missed her too. Hadley, what are you doing to the poor man? Trying to get him to leave. Maybe you can tell me why she's acting like this, I said. Helena scowled and crossed her arms at her sister. Hadley's jaw dropped and she shook her head. You're going to side with him, after everything? I told you 2 years ago you were overreacting, Helena said with a shrug. The man deserves to know the truth, and you, stop acting like the world's going to end. It's not. We've been doing fine for 2 years. Nothing that terrible has happened. Tell him, make up, and get on with your lives. She leaned into my side as she whispered, You do plan on staying, right? I considered lying, but it was useless with Helena. She had a very keen sense of what others were feeling. I came to get closure so I could move on, but I don't think I ever will. This is my home, I said to Hadley. I'd like to come back to it. Helena, Hadley uttered through gritted teeth. You know why this is a bad idea. No, I know why you think it's a bad idea. She headed for the storeroom and called over her shoulder, Either you tell him or I will. Hadley looked ready to go after Helena and give her a piece of her mind. I sidled in between her and the doorway. She turned that glare on me, but beneath the annoyance was all the love she still had for me. Even with our time apart, it hadn't dampened at all. So much for moving on. I no longer even wanted to consider going back to London. How could I, when the life I wanted was once again laid out at my feet? All I had to do was convince this crazy witch that her being magic wasn't going to make me spontaneously combust. I'll come back every day until you tell me, I warned her. Every damn day. I'm not walking away from you again. She angrily ran her hands through her hair, then took a deep breath in and let it out. I patiently waited for her to find the words, but she never got the chance. A sharp crack came from the shop. Helena screamed in alarm. A half-second later, lightning flashed outside, and this time the cracking sound was 10 times louder. The lights flickered. We jumped. That was close, I muttered. Too close. Hadley frowned as she hurried to the windows. Where the hell did this come from? The sky had been clear on my walkover, but as I joined her at the window, all I saw were black clouds filling the sky. Another sharp crack came from the shop, and then Helena was yelling for her sister. Get your butt in here, she shouted louder. Hadley rushed through the kitchen and storeroom to the shop with me right behind her. Helena stood at the weather mirror, pointing a shaking finger at it. The surface reflected the black sky outside, and another flash of lightning shot through the glass a half-second before lightning struck. This time the lights did go out, and we were plunged into semi-darkness. Hadley snapped her fingers, then waved her hand around the shop. Every single candle came to life, filling the room with glowing light. It's a lightning storm, Helena said as another flash blinded us, and the crack made us jump. The mirror, Hadley whispered, reaching for the glass. I've never seen that happen. A massive crack, as if someone struck the surface of the mirror with a hammer, ran from one end to the other, right through the middle. As we watched, tiny cracks spiderwebbed off, reaching the frame on all sides. Hadley pulled her hand back and looked at Helena in alarm. Rena. Where is she? Still sleeping when I left, Helena said, then cursed. I had no idea what was going on, but both sisters bolted out the front door without another word. I waited a second longer, then was following them sprinting through town. The few other people crazy enough to be out in a lightning storm ran for cover, as another bright flash illuminated the darkening sky. This bolt struck at the far end of the road, probably charring the pavement. "We shouldn't be out in this," I said, out of breath as I caught up to Hadley. "Don't have a choice," she replied. "You should go back." I didn't say a word, staying right by hers and Helena's side. The house came into view after 5 hard minutes of running. Just as we reached it, a bolt of lightning struck the highest point beside the widow's walk. Hadley cursed as Helena started screaming for Hedrina. Without hesitating for a second, I raced up the front porch steps and burst into the house right behind them, ready to face down whatever craziness I'd just waltzed back into.
Chapter 5. Hadley. "Rena," I called as I slipped on the rug in the entryway. 2 strong hands quickly caught me and righted me. Edric had come with us. There'd be no more lying to him after this, but worry for my sister overrode finding a way to zap him out of the house and keep him out. Panic flowed through my body. "Rena, answer me, damn it." Footsteps thundered toward us from the stairwell. Our youngest sister popped into view. "It's not me," she said quickly. "I have no idea what's going on, but it's not me." She frowned when she reached the bottom step, glancing past me. "Edric?" "Hey, Rena." Hedrina jumped off the last step with a laugh and hugged him. "I thought someone said you were in town. You're staying, right?" "I am," he said, even as I shook my head. Hedrina raised her brow at me, but whatever she was about to give me crap about was cut off when another bolt of lightning struck the house. We jumped in unison. The lights flickered but stayed on. Benefits of a magical home. "Maybe it's just a storm." "A normal storm," Helena said, but she didn't sound convinced. "No storm can crack that glass," I argued. "The weather mirror cracked?" Hedrina held up her hands. "I swear it's not me. I haven't had an episode since yesterday. I was sound asleep until the storm woke me." Edric's brow crinkled. He had questions, lots of questions. I saw them forming in his eyes as he glanced from Hedrina, then to Helena, and finally to me. Silently, I begged him to wait. I was still going to try and find some way to make him leave. After our episode at the shop, I doubted that was going to be easy. My lips were still tingling from that kiss. By the goddess, I missed him more than I'd thought. The longer he looked at me, the more I was reminded of how much time we missed out on because I let fear get the better of me. Fear that was still going to try to send him away before it was too late. We moved through the house to the kitchen and looked out the back windows. Lightning continued to strike the water and the cliffs around the house. Each time I jumped and Edric shifted closer. He didn't touch me, but his presence at my back, protective and comforting, was more than enough. I imagined leaning against his chest and letting him hold me again. I sensed myself about to do it when Hedrina gasped and clutched her head. "Rena." Helena had hold of Hedrina's shoulders, but our baby sister flailed away from her grasp. "No, don't let it take control. Fight it." "I can't," Hedrina whispered roughly and sank to her knees. Edric watched, confused and worried, as Hedrina threw her head back and screamed. "What's happening to her?" "What's been happening for the last 2 years," I replied without thinking. He shot me a look, until Hedrina doubled over so far her forehead rested on the tile floor, her hair splayed out like a halo around her. "Rena." I went to her and rested my hand on her shoulder. "Come on, you're stronger than it." Hissing, gravelly laughter issued from Hedrina's mouth as she lifted her head. Pale eyes looked back at me, but I held my ground and didn't back away. "You really think she can win?" the demon asked, tilting my sister's head. "You're a fool, Hadley, always a fool." "What do you want?" I snapped. The pale eyes flicked behind me and narrowed. "Well, now this I did not expect. Edric has come home." "How sweet." The demon gagged as if it was about to be sick. "You should have stayed away." I blocked its view of Edric, and its gaze focused on me. "I asked you a question, Mazeroth." Hedrina shuddered at the use of the demon's name. A vicious growl erupted from her mouth, as those eyes grew even paler. "That will not hold power over me forever." But it does right now, and that's all I need. Answer me, Mazeroth. What do you want? Hedrina's jaw worked back and forth, then finally, Mazeroth spoke, each word sounding as if it was being forced out. To watch you die. Watch you all die. You aren't ready for what's coming. Its croaky cackling filled the kitchen as it glanced at all of us in turn. I hope you're ready to lose, because that's what you're going to do. Then finally, I'll be free. You're almost as weak as she is, he went on. So much guilt inside you, Hadley, so much guilt holding you down. Guilt over Heather and Hedrina. And Edric. I won't have to lift a finger. Guilt will tear you apart before I ever get the chance. It was suddenly difficult to breathe. With each word he spoke, it was like someone dropped another weight on my shoulders, crushing me. I wanted to not feel guilty about my sisters or Edric, but how could I not? It was all my fault. All of it. Helena stood right by my side as she told Mazeroth, that will never happen. Won't it? I sense Rena weakening as I grow stronger. She can't hold out forever, and once she's gone, I'll finally have what I want and you will be, Mazeroth choked. Hedrina collapsed to the floor. She dug her fingertips into the tile, and when she looked up again, her eyes were back to normal. I hugged her as she fell forward. I've got you. You're fine. We're all right here. I couldn't stop him, she whispered into my shoulder. What he said, about something coming. He's excited about it. I held her face in my hands as I said, no matter what it is, we'll fight it together. We'll win, you hear me? He will not kick you out of your own body. We won't let him. The storm looks like it's passing, Helena said, standing by the back door. Hedrina's eyes fluttered. I told her she should go upstairs and lay down, but she shook her head. There are questions that need to be answered. We'll figure out what Mazeroth meant later. Not about the demon. She nodded behind me. I think it's time you finally tell him the truth. No more excuses. I turned to Edric. He nodded. Truth would be nice. I'll put on the kettle, Helena announced. I groaned inwardly. This was going to be a very, very long day. Chapter 6. Hadley. The chamomile tea had gone cold in my mug. I'd been talking for the better part of an hour. Hedrina and Helena chimed in now and again with more details than I'd been willing to offer. Edric hadn't said a word except to ask 2 questions. When I reached the part of the story where we had our fight, and I sent him away, I ran out of words and simply focused on the kitchen table. A chair scraped against the floor and I glanced up. Edric was pacing around the kitchen. Helena sat on the kitchen counter, while Hedrina was with me at the table. I watched him, noting how at home he appeared here. It had always been like that with him. He just fit so perfectly into my life. My stomach sank, knowing if he did come back to stay, his life would be in constant danger. Now, it wasn't merely the demon possessing Hedrina I had to worry about, but whatever caused the lightning storm. Nothing about that was natural, which meant trouble was on the way. A demon, he finally said as he faced the 3 of us. Hedrina was possessed by a demon, nearly died, and you 2 saved her, and you didn't think to tell me any of this. Realization filled his eyes, and he sighed. That night you didn't answer your phone, you were at the hospital. Damn it, Hadley, I should have been there. How could you not tell me? I didn't know how to explain, I whispered into my mug. When the demon first made itself known, it got to us. It knew just how to hurt us, and it threatened to hurt you. Repeatedly. I pushed my mug aside and sat back in the chair. The things it said it would do to you, the vivid details, I just couldn't let that happen. So, you sent me away instead of letting me stay and help. But you can't help, I argued. We haven't been able to get him out of Hedrina for 2 years. Nothing works, and it's only getting worse. I gave Hedrina an apologetic glance. She took my hand and held it. It's okay, it's the truth. But he's right. You shouldn't have sent him away. I won't let him get hurt. You are my family, Edric said. Family takes care of each other. I know I'm not a witch, but I could have been here for you. To give you support, to help watch over your sister. A demon isn't going to scare me off. It should. I took my hand from Hedrina's as I stood. If anything happens to you, I won't be able to live with myself. To be fair, Hedrina said as she held up her hand, it'd be me who hurt him. You're not helping, I muttered. She shrugged. Just saying Mazeroth might think he's getting stronger, but I'm not about to roll over and play dead. I gave up once. I won't make that mistake, and you shouldn't either. She stood and planted her hands on her hips. Do not push this man away again, because I brought this shit on myself. Don't, or I'll never forgive you. You didn't trap a demon in your soul, I pointed out. I'm alive, because of what you and Helena did. I've already forgiven you for it, but it's my fault the demon's here in the first place. Move on, sister. Be with your man, and stop thinking you can be happy without him. You're not fooling anyone. She went to Edric and hugged him. And you better not think of leaving. I know she's a pain in the ass, but you love her. How about both of you stop being stupid? Someone in this family needs to find love, and get a happily ever after. My mouth was hanging open as she exited the kitchen. Edric laughed quietly after Rena called back to Helena to let us have some alone time. You heard her, Helena said when I started to protest. And she's right. Talk, and you better not leave this damned house until you convince her you belong together. She poked Edric in the chest as she left us. Silence settled over the kitchen, and when we said nothing for a solid minute, Helena suddenly poked her head back in and gave us both an intense glare. Then she left again. I sighed, plopping down in one of the kitchen chairs. Nice to see some things haven't changed, Edric noted. Nope, they haven't changed one bit. At least not personality-wise. Hedrina, it's been hard, I admitted. She tries so hard. Stop talking about me and get to you two, Hedrina yelled from the other end of the house. How about you stop eavesdropping, I shouted back. I will, once I know you're doing what you're told. That's it. I stood again, and with a snap of my fingers, I created magical soundproofing for the kitchen. It started as a bluish glow between my palms, then expanded as I spread my arms wide. The walls, ceiling, and floor of the kitchen glowed briefly, then went back to normal. Much better. I wiped my hands on my apron, then turned around to find Edric grinning. I found myself frozen in place, as I remembered how much I loved seeing those dimples on his face when he was pleased. I missed you, I heard myself say. I never should have left. He took a step closer. My heart rate increased and my palms grew sweaty. It was like I was meeting him for the first time all over again. My knees grew wobbly, and when I tried to take a step back, I faltered. Edric was right there to catch me in his arms. All this time I told myself you were right, that I didn't need you. He murmured, you were so wrong. I know, but you've seen how bad it can be. I'm not scared. Well, I am. I cupped his cheek. It was bad enough when Heather lost her shit, and you were around. Now, I have no idea what's going to happen. There are times when Hedrina gets bad, really bad, and she's unpredictable. And last night, I removed myself from his arms, but he stayed right with me, not letting me get away. What about last night? I fiddled with the apron, then finally untied it and chucked it on the kitchen table. I wasn't even sure why I was still wearing it. Not like I was getting back to the shop any time today. My mind was in too much of a mess to bake, and not burn the shit out of everything. Hadley. Nothing, I lied as I turned around. Rena just had a bad day is all, and then I saw you, and there's just a lot on my mind right now. I wasn't exactly expecting you to show up, after all this time. And you're not lingering at all on what that demon said? I crossed my arms and squared my shoulders. Nope, not one bit. Why are you still blaming yourself for Heather? Because I knew that guy was bad news. I knew it, and I saw her slipping, I said, trying to hold back years of pent-up anger. I should have been able to stop her, but I couldn't. You did everything you could. She was the one who didn't want to be saved. You can't help someone who won't help themselves. Her turning is not on you, and it's time you let it go. His gaze shifted upward. And Rena? That is definitely my fault. Sounds like she forgave you, so you can let go of that shit too. Which leaves me. You can't just expect me to let all this go just like that. He shrugged. Not all at once, but you can start to move forward. And I share the guilt you have over the night I left. I could have fought harder, but I gave up on you, on us. I'm not doing that again. You make all of this sound so simple, I mumbled. I just want you to not be bogged down by guilt for the rest of your life. Shit happened and you and your sisters are still here. I'm here. He tucked my hair behind my ears, then kissed my forehead, breathing me in at the same time. Still smell like cake batter. He tilted his head and studied me for a few seconds. How about we go on a date? Tonight. Our usual place and just talk. 2 years is a lot of time to miss out on. We can catch up. No stress. No running away, he said with a stern look. Can you do that much for me? Maybe we can work on letting go of some more guilt while we're at it. I almost said no, but I owed him at least one date so we could talk and see where the evening went. See you at 7. 7 it is. He made for the kitchen exit, stopping when he reached it. You haven't lost your touch with the baking either. Thought I'd let you know. He winked. I listened to his steps move through the house, then finally out the front door. I barely dropped the soundproofing that had given us privacy when Hedrina and Helena rushed into the kitchen. So? Helena asked, bouncing on her feet. Please tell me he's staying. We're going on a date tonight, I said. They squealed and jumped around the kitchen like they were 10 again. Seriously? It's just a date so we can talk. That's it. We haven't decided anything yet. What's there to decide? You love him and he loves you. It's been 2 years, I reminded Hedrina. People can change. Yeah, I don't think so. Helena took hold of one of my hands, as Hedrina grabbed the other. This calls for some sisterly love. Oh no, you two aren't turning this into an excuse to get me all dolled up. Helena and Hedrina giggled, as they tugged me toward the stairs and up to my room. I was sat on the bed, as they disappeared into my closet, and debated on what I should wear tonight. Hedrina complained that everything I had was blue. I rolled my eyes, falling back on the bed to stare at the ceiling. I was going on a date with Edric. This was definitely not how I thought this day would go, but it wasn't like I could be upset about it. He now knew the truth of why I pushed him away. I wished it would have scared him all the way back to London. Instead, his resolve was stronger than it was the night when I slammed the door in his face. When Helena finally dug out a sexy little dress I hadn't seen in a long time, and laid it on the bed, my stomach was in knots about what tonight might lead to. You're panicking. Why are you panicking? Helena demanded, as she smoothed out the wrinkles on the navy blue halter dress. I didn't even say anything. And it's a bit chilly for that. You have plenty of cardigans. Talk to me, what's going on inside that head of yours? I held up the dress, and strained to remember the last time I'd even worn it. When it hit me, I laughed. Figures you'd pick this one. I have a very good fashion sense, Helena reminded me, pressing her hand to her chest with pride. Now spill. You shouldn't be panicking. You should be thrilled right now. Beyond thrilled. You sure about that? Ah yes. Your long-lost love spent 2 years failing to move on from you. He loves you so much that he came all the way back here to tell you so. She clasped her hands together and her eyelids fluttered. So freaking romantic. Aren't you forgetting about the last 24 hours? Nothing happened, Hedrina said as she came out of the closet carrying a pair of strappy black heels. I frowned at them and she shrugged. They were in there, don't ask me where they came from. Once upon a time, you liked being sexy for your dates with Edric. You two are insane. No, possessed by a demon and creepy good at sensing emotions, Hedrina said as she set the shoes by the bed, then fell onto it beside me. Whatever, and yeah, stuff did happen. The crow hitting the window. That isn't normal. Helena and Hedrina exchanged a glance. One crow randomly flying into the house does not a bad omen make. Nor the ring around the moon, she said hastily when I was about to remind her of that too. And the lightning storm? Explain that one to me. Helena and Hedrina looked everywhere around the room except at me. Exactly. Whatever caused that storm might have something to do with the crow and the ring around the moon. What if Edric does stick around and then all hell breaks loose? What if this is when he gets hurt? Honey, to be fair, he's a grown man. You can't make him go away, Helena said as she patted my hand. He understands he has no magic, and he's not stupid. Love makes people act irrationally, I muttered. You're going on this date, Hedrina said as she stood. That's final. Stop worrying about everything for once. You deserve this, you do. Now, I expect you in the bathroom in 20 minutes so we can get started on your hair and makeup. I literally have all day, I complained, pointing at the clock on the nightstand. It's not even noon yet. And? It's going to take that long to make you stop freaking out. She beamed at me as she headed for the door. Don't make me call Mom on your ass. She would too. Helena trailed out of the bedroom next. I listened to them both, laughing away in the bathroom. Maybe they were right, and I was reading signs where there weren't any. Edric was back, and this was our second chance. I'd be an idiot to waste it.
Chapter 7. Edric. At 7 on the dot, I stood outside the cafe and waited for sign of Hadley. Her sisters had texted me several times throughout the day to let me know they were going to drag her here if they had to, but she would be there, no matter what. I rechecked my cell and sighed. 2 minutes passed. She'll be here, I told myself, and watched another couple head inside for dinner. She will. I spent the day getting to know the town again, hitting all our old hangouts. When I bumped into Mr. Jenkins again, I managed to explain to him that I had come to try and make it work with Hadley. He held off on beating me over the head with his cane, but the threat remained in his eyes all the same. When I returned to the B&B, Glinda had been ecstatic to learn I'd be having dinner with Hadley tonight and that we were speaking again. Not knowing how much the sisters had told the town about Hedrina's condition, I left out any details on the matter and let them think the job was the reason I'd up and left Hadley. It bothered me on multiple levels, but not everyone in this town was open to the existence of magic. As more people entered the cafe, I paced the sidewalk and checked my cell. 10 past 7. I knew there was something Hadley wasn't telling me. Whatever happened last night after she ran away from me had her spooked. I tried to be hopeful, but all I saw was her slamming the door in my face again as she tried to keep me safe. She was so scared to lose me that she was going to lose me forever if she wasn't careful. A loud cawing made me flinch. 2 crows perched on a low-hanging tree branch beside the cafe. Several more flew in to join them, and they cawed at each other. Seeing crows wasn't all that strange, but unless something had changed in the last 2 years, none had been spotted in Melancholy since Heather disappeared. The second her name crossed my mind, the crows fell silent and turned to stare at me with black, soulless eyes. My blood ran cold, and a chill wind blew across my neck. I shivered, finding myself unable to look away. Edric, Hadley called from behind me. Whatever hold the crows had on me was gone. Not merely because she said my name. I blinked, and the birds themselves just vanished as if they'd never been there to begin with. You okay? Hadley asked as I backed my way toward her. Look like you've seen a ghost. Yeah, I'm good, I said, not wanting to give her a reason to doubt tonight. She looked beyond me to the tree. You sure? Yep, completely. You hungry? I'm starving. I offered her my arm. She continued to stare at the tree, then finally tucked her hand in the crook of my elbow. I took a second to really look at her and laughed quietly. From the hint of annoyance on her face, the curled hair and makeup were not her doing. You look beautiful, by the way. We started to walk, but then I pulled her to a stop. That dress, is it the same one from that night? The dress hit her above the knees and became form-fitting when it hit her waist. The V-neck was close to plunging. A dark sapphire crystal, dangling from a silver chain, was nestled right above her cleavage. My gaze drifted lower to the strappy black heels that gave her an extra 3 inches. Oh yeah, her sisters definitely helped her get ready. The heels, the hair, the makeup, that was never something Hadley cared about. Nor I, for that matter. I most enjoyed seeing her in an apron, with flour covering her face and hands. And wearing minimal, if anything, underneath. Yes, she finally replied, and her cheeks reddened. This is that dress. Did you pick it out, or them? Oh, they did, don't you worry about that. I'm going to assume they don't realize the significance. Her cheeks turned even redder, then she was laughing. No, but to be honest, it's about the only dress I have at the moment. Got rid of all the others, kept this one. I cleared my throat roughly as I held open the door for her, and Mike led us to our usual table by the windows. That damn dress was the one she wore the night we fell into bed together for the first time. You look good too, she said after we placed our drink orders. Beers for both. Thanks. I didn't exactly bring a lot with me. You always look sexy in flannel, she mused, running her finger absently along the rim of her water glass. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and I didn't have to guess too hard to know what she was thinking about. I was doing the same. Right, we're supposed to be talking. Guess we should do that. If you want. I'm fine with simply staring at each other like creepers. She laughed and flicked water at me. Funny. Just saying. I miss seeing your face every day, I confessed. And God, do I miss your baking. Still can't make a cookie to save your life, huh? Nope. My flatmates told me I'm banned from the kitchen after the last time. I glanced around for the waitress and our beers. I was trying to replicate that one cherry thing you made, the cake that wasn't a cake. Ended up burning it to a crisp. Filled the whole place with smoke. Maybe I'll make you some while you're in town. While I'm in town, I repeated. Do you still think I'm going back? You have a job over there, a really good one. And a life. She focused her attention on the table. I can't ask you to give all that up. You're not. I'm doing it willingly. Just like I was going to do the first time. You really want to settle down in small-town Maine? I reached across the table for her hand, running my thumb across her knuckles. I want to come home, Hadley, to you. I'll admit I was angry yesterday when I got here, but I understand why you thought you couldn't be around me. Edric, she started, but I shook my head, stopping her. I am not leaving you again, not unless you look me in the eye right now and say you don't love me. I held my breath as she raised her head and focused dark blue eyes on me. After a solid 30 seconds, I knew because I counted, I murmured, "You're killing me here." Her lips curled into a smile, and she sighed. I can't, she finally whispered. Good. I started to say more, but the waitress returned with our drinks and took our dinner order. Now, I want to hear about everything you've been doing for the last 2 years, and I mean everything, I insisted. I have all night. She hesitated and started to pull back. Firmly, I held onto her hand, trying to tell her without words there was no more hiding. Whatever she was worried about or afraid of, she could tell me. She shrugged. There are some things that might not be the same between us. I don't know if we can just pick up where we left off. Then we don't. We start over. What? I held out my other hand for hers and smiled. Hi, my name's Edric. I'm an accountant, a closet romantic sap, can't cook a damn thing except for hot dogs, and I like dogs. She smirked as she took my outstretched hand, so both our hands were clasped together. I'm Hadley, she said in a teasing tone. I own a shop and a bakery with my sisters, and baking is my life. Along with magic, but mostly baking. And I like dogs too, as long as they're big and fluffy. Good to know. So, tell me about this store of yours. Edric, she said, but but I waved at her to go on. Fine, I'll tell you about the store, even though you already know everything about the store. I rested my chin in my knuckles and let her know I was all ears. It took another second, but once she started talking, there was no stopping her. The conversation turned into all the others we had over the years, filled with laughter and jokes. We talked about my job in London and how boring it was not having someone around doing magic all the time. I told her about the people I worked with, and she filled me in on all the town's gossip. We talked and talked through dinner, dessert, and 2 coffees. About 3 hours later, I was wiping tears of mirth from my eyes as she struggled to catch her breath. She was cracking up so hard. Now this is a sight I have not seen in a long while, Mike said as he approached our table. What? Hadley managed to say through her laughter. You having a good time, he said bluntly, and she shot him a look. Just being honest. And as much as I love seeing it, I'd also like to close up for the night. I glanced around, surprised to see we were the last 2 customers. The chairs had been put up on the other tables, and most of the lights dimmed. I checked my cell and flinched. It wasn't 10. It was almost 11. Great as always, I told Mike as I left a huge tip on the table for our waitress. This place. You're not leaving, right? He asked. She's a lot better when you're here. Hadley seemed taken aback by his words. What is it with everyone? You all make it sound like I turned into some depressed shell of myself without him here. Mike arched a brow and crossed his arm. Well, weren't you? No. She tugged on her cardigan. Still a bad liar. Mike winked and clapped me on the shoulder. Glad to have you back, Edric. I do hope you're sticking around for good this time. Working on it, I said, but I was looking at Hadley. Once we were outside, she shivered. I shrugged out of my heavy, fleece-lined denim jacket. I draped it over her shoulders. She immediately pulled it close and brought the fabric to her nose. My chest warmed as I watched her slip her arms into the sleeves like she'd done so many times before with that same jacket. I stuck my hands in my front pockets, and she wrapped her hands around my arm as we walked to her house. Sky's pretty tonight. I leaned my head back to take in the sight of so many stars. Don't get to see that in London. No, I suppose you don't. I think tonight went well. She leaned into me more. Yeah, it did. I placed my arm over her shoulders. Does that mean you're going to stop panicking? She blew out a breath, sending a curl flying out of her face. I don't want you to regret coming back here one day. You'll have to find a new job, and you'll be leaving all those new friends you made, and magic isn't always predictable. Crazy shit can happen. Stop laughing, she said, even though she was already laughing with me. I don't see what's funny about a potentially life-threatening situation. You still need someone to handle the books for the shop. She cringed. Helena's gotten better. I'm going to take that as a yes. So that solves the job part. And my friends can get on a plane if they want to come see me so badly, and vice versa. As far as magic, I miss a bit of unpredictability in my life. The numbers are comforting in a way, but it can get a bit mundane. We fell silent for the rest of the walk through town and down the gravel road that led to the old Victorian house, standing resolute on the cliff overlooking the cove. I gently tugged her to a stop just before the archway. You never said anything about me finding a place to live. She shrugged, then nodded at the house. I thought that much was obvious. You're sure? If we're serious about a second chance, I don't want to wait around for things to feel right when they already do. She dug her pointed heel into the gravel and grabbed hold of me by my shirt to draw me in. I can't promise I'm not going to be worried about you constantly, but Mike's right. So are my sisters. I'm not happy when you're not around. I never should have made you leave, and I don't want you to leave again. Ever. I don't think I could. I cut off whatever else she'd been about to say with a kiss. I lifted her off her feet and spun her around as she laughed, throwing her head back and soaking up the night. We'd wasted 2 years apart. I was more than ready to embrace life with Hadley and all it entailed. Setting her back on her feet, we walked under the archway and up to the house. "There you two are," Helena yelled from above us. I was wondering if we were going to have to call the sheriff. Helena and Hedrina sat on the widow's walk. The wind was blustery, but it didn't seem to bother them. A ball of fire hovered between them, steady and strong, keeping them warm. "I love magic," I whispered at the sight. "Not sure this would work if you didn't." Hadley took my hand, and then we were inside. She kicked out of her heels, adding them to the massive shoe pile that always baffled me. Then we were sprinting up the steps and down the hall to a bedroom I never thought I'd see again. Once we were inside her room, she kicked the door closed and snapped her fingers. Several candles came to life, casting flickering shadows along the walls and ceiling. She shrugged out of my jacket and then threw herself into my arms. My fingers ran through her hair, letting the thick strands fall between my fingers. I held her close as my hands roamed over her back. They remembered every inch of her, as if we hadn't been parted for so long. I kept thinking this was a dream, but each time I opened my eyes, Hadley was still there in my arms. Her lips were pressed to mine, her body warm and definitely real. I spun her around, nuzzling her neck and loving how she smelled of fresh-baked cookies when something caught my eye on the nightstand. It shone silver and gleaming in the candlelight. "Edric." I frowned the longer I looked at it, then smiled when I realized what it was. "You kept it." I stretched out my hand and picked up the locket I'd given her. "How could I not? It has what has to be one of the cheesiest romantic lines on it ever," she teased, then kissed my cheek. "Kept it safe and sound." I held it out to her, and she removed the blue crystal from her neck, then turned her back to me. Carefully, I undid the silver clasp and draped the locket around her neck. When she twirled around, the skirt of her dress swirling around her thighs, the necklace hung perfectly as I knew it would. "Well, what do you think? Still look good on me?" My mind flashed to the ring I'd held onto all this time. I grinned as I cupped her face and kissed her in reply. She'd be seeing that ring one day soon. No more waiting and wondering. No more dealing with regrets or wishing I'd never left. I was going to live in the moment, starting right now. A thud against the window made us flinch and snap our heads in that direction. "What was that?" She shook her head, confused. "No idea." The look in her eyes was full-blown worry. "You never told me what happened last night," I tried, but she shushed me. "Hadley." "Just hang on a second." She slipped from the bed and tiptoed to the window. When nothing else hit the glass, her shoulders sagged, and she rubbed her forehead. "Last night, a crow bashed into the bathroom window while I was in there. Killed itself. Then there was a ring around the moon. I did what I always do. Overthink everything." "A crow," I said, throwing my legs over the side of the bed now. "Yeah, wait, why do you have that look on your face?" "What look?" I said, trying to make my face blank. "The same look you had at the cafe. You were staring at something. What was it?" "It's probably nothing, but there were a couple of crows sitting on a branch. Least I thought they were there, but when you showed up, they just disappeared." She was tugging on her hair now and shaking her head. "Damn it. It's probably nothing, like you said. Too bad my gut's saying it's something." She started for the bed when another thud had her whipping around. I hopped to my feet and went to see when something else struck the window. Then something else. "Are those rocks?" I strained to see through the rippled glass and couldn't, so I threw the window open. The objects appeared round, but they weren't perfect orbs. It wasn't hailing, as far as I could tell. Hadley reached her hand out the window to try and catch one, but none came close enough. Footsteps sounded overhead, then came rushing down the hall to her room. "Hey," Helena said through the door. "I know you two are having private time, but we have problems." Hadley rushed over to her bedroom door as I stuck my hand out, trying to grab hold of whatever was raining from the sky. "You guys see what it was?" she asked her sisters. "Is that what I think it is?" Just then, one of the objects landed in my palm. It wasn't hard at all, but malleable and slimy. Confused, I withdrew my hand and carried the object over to the sisters. "Is that a frog?" I shifted the amphibian around in my hand, its legs falling between my fingers. "It's raining frogs," Hadley whispered. I was wondering if they were all dead, when the frog suddenly sprang to life and leaped out of my hand and out the bedroom door. "You still sure you miss magic?" Hadley muttered, as the frog in Helena's hand jerked to life and went after the first one. What the hell is going on here?
Chapter 8. Hadley. Of all the nights for it to start raining frogs, it had to be last night. Couldn't have been before Edric came back to town, or after he'd been here a while. No, it had to be last night. I grumbled as I snapped my fingers, and the coffee pot came to life, gurgling and brewing a fresh dose for the morning. It was way too early. Yesterday was a really long day, but I had to get to the bakery and see if we had any information at all in the books at the shop about raining frogs. That, and since I ran out of the shop yesterday, the kitchen would still be a mess, and we really needed to be open today. Helena and Hedrina had stayed up all night, searching through the texts we had in the attic looking for anything mentioning frogs. By the time Edric and I turned in at 3:30, they hadn't found anything. We had a few more books stored at the shop, Nana's older ones. I knew of at least one that had numerous passages on various omens and what they meant. Freaking frogs. I peeked out the kitchen windows to find the backyard alive with the buggers that had decided to fall from the sky. Really? I stormed out the back door, muttering curses as I went. "Oh, what are you doing?" Helena asked me 10 minutes later when she appeared in the back door of the greenhouse, holding a cup of coffee. "I am getting rid of these nuisances." I held a broom in my hands and was shooing the damned frogs to the edge of the yard and through the fence. I don't want them in the gardens. You know how bad they can be for the plants. It's almost October. There aren't that many plants left. I don't care. I swatted at another two as they tried to head back to the house. "No, that way, you stupid wart-covered toads." "Oh, now don't insult them like that." I muttered another stream of curses as more made it past my broom. "You know you are a witch. And you know I don't like using magic for everything. Besides," I added, "it doesn't work on them." "What?" "Yeah, that's right. They're magic-resistant frogs." I gave up on trying to shoo them, and just started swatting them through the grass and dead plants, sending frogs flying every which way. "You're just mad because they ruined your night of fun." I sent a rather large frog soaring over the fence with a grunt. "And? Hey, not saying I blame you, just try not to slaughter all the frogs in Melancholy." After a quick look around the yard, I nodded in satisfaction that majority of the pests were gone. I rested the broom against the house and followed Helena into the kitchen. I poured myself a mug of coffee and leaned against the counter. "At least it wasn't another dead crow," she said through a yawn. "Edric saw them last night." Helena paused mid-stretch with one arm at an awkward angle over her head as her eyes went wide. "What? Where?" "Outside the cafe. He's not sure if he actually saw them, though." "Still means nothing." "Yeah, let's just ignore the ring around the moon and the dead crow, and now the fact that it rained frogs. Oh," I added loudly, "let's not forget the lightning storm that was so powerful it cracked the weather mirror that's been in our family for a couple of 100 years. Finding a way to fix it without having to call our parents was also on my to-do list for the day. I'm going to head to the shop and try to do some business today since we were closed all day yesterday." "Prince Charming still asleep?" "Yeah, I didn't want to wake him." I topped off my coffee, then trudged back upstairs. I passed a half-asleep Rena on the way down and handed her my mug. She looked like she needed it more than I did. "No bad dreams?" I asked as she sluggishly continued down. "Not a one for once," she mumbled, shaking out her messy hair. "What were you doing outside?" "Nothing, don't worry about it." Quietly, I opened my bedroom door and was greeted by soft, manly snoring. I stifled a laugh when Edric snorted and buried his face in my pillow. I grabbed a pair of jeans and a heavy blue sweater from my closet, dressed, then scooped my keys off the dresser. I considered waking him, but he looked so peaceful and damned near perfect in my bed. I leaned over and kissed his forehead. His lips curled into a sleepy grin, his eyes remained closed and his breathing steady. My sisters would tell him where to find me once he woke up. With that in mind, I left the bedroom, picked out a pair of black boots from the pile at the front door, and hurried into town. It was evident that I wasn't the only one annoyed with the frogs or confused by what brought them here. Not that anyone else would be thinking they were an omen of something terrible coming this way. Damned frogs, Mr. Jenkins seethed as he tried to walk down the sidewalk covered with hopping pests. He set his cane on one. It let out a weird squeak and tried to get out of the way. The old man was knocked off balance and was about to fall over, until I snapped my fingers and he righted. He glanced around, and when his gaze landed on me, his brow furrowed. "What have I told you about doing that? Would you rather fall and be covered in frogs?" I challenged. He grunted and kept on walking. "I just know these frogs are trouble," he muttered as he passed me. "Whatever you girls are up to now, it's all trouble." I headed around to the back of the shop. "Come back in an hour and I'll have something for you," I called over my shoulder. The clicking of Mr. Jenkins' cane stopped, then started up again. Oh, he'd be back. He couldn't stand to miss anything I'd freshly baked. Once inside the kitchen, I snapped my fingers, bringing everything to life. The oven turned on, preheating to the temperature I needed. The ingredients fell in line and began to measure themselves out. Once the mixer was running full steam ahead, I hurried to the front room to see what candles needed to be replaced, since we burned through a few of them yesterday. People walking by the windows waved at me, and I let them all know we'd be open just a bit later this morning. Many were still trying to avoid the frogs, while the city officials, Sheriff Burney and Mayor Sean Dillwood, stood in the middle of the street, shaking their heads and waving their arms around as if trying to figure out what to do with the current state of melancholy. If I could have magicked the little critters away, I would have, but they were magic resistant. That was just odd. I checked on the muffins, poured them into their tins after adding some much-needed patience to one batch as well as decisiveness to another, which I'd made special for the sheriff and mayor. It would be to everyone's benefit if they made a decision quickly concerning the frogs. Once the muffins were in the oven, I climbed a set of old wooden stairs leading to the second floor. The safe where we kept the money for the shop was to the right, the desk in the middle, but it was the bookshelf on the left I went to first. The shelves were filled with boxes of old crystals and other trinkets that had been left in the shop when we took over from our parents. Some of the items had lost their magic over the years. Others were a bit on the sketchy side as to what exactly they were for. Magic could change, and anything unpredictable was pulled from the shop to prevent an accident. Along with the odd trinkets, there had been several books we uncovered that left us all uneasy. Nana and her parents before her had dabbled in all sorts of magic. She wasn't a dark witch, and certainly hadn't come from them, but some magic was lost in a gray area on whether it was good or not. I waved my hand over the shelf, and it shuddered as it slid to the side along an invisible set of tracks. Beyond it was a tiny room, barely the size of the storeroom downstairs. Here was where we kept anything we deemed dangerous. That included an ancient book on omens and how to interpret them. It might sound weird, but some people were simply out looking for trouble. We had one of those in this town. Mindy was damned good at stirring up the people here any time she thought there was something hinky going on. To say she was paranoid was to put it lightly. She came to us once a week for a spell or potion that would make the government stop watching her. There was no spell to do that, of course, but we gave her ones that would ease the paranoia without damaging her mind. Helena was in charge of those potions. If the balance was just slightly out of whack, it would take Mindy to the extreme, and who knew what she'd do then. If she ever got her hands on a book that told her how to look for bad omens and what they meant, she'd either be screaming at everyone that they were going to die, or she'd be hiding in her house, too scared to leave again. Fear was potent, magic or no magic. The other books held recipes to bring one good luck or attempt to bring wealth. Self-gain. We didn't believe in using magic to better our lives, aside from mundane things that really brought no benefit. Nana's generation of witches had been very different. They pushed the boundaries of what magic could do. All that did was invite trouble. As I walked to the back of the small room, my gaze darted to the left. On a pedestal was a black tome bound in silver chains with an enchanted padlock. It was because of that book my sister was now tied to a demon, possibly forever. She'd stumbled across it, opened it, and the next thing she knew, Mazeroth was inside her mind searching for a permanent way to stay. Some books were just too dangerous. I moved past the chained book to the stack on a shelf in the very back. They were covered in dust. I tilted my head to read the titles. I could have called our parents and asked them, but since Heather left us, any time we called with a magic issue, they went straight to panic mode. I thought we could handle raining frogs. And a lightning storm. Finding the book I wanted, the cover worn and the embossed silver letters faded, I tucked it under my arm and left the secret room. I took the cash drawer from the safe and returned to the shop front just as Helena and Hedrina came in from the kitchen. "Perfect," Hedrina said as she took the book from me. "I was worried we didn't have this anymore. Omens and how to tell if they're going to kill you. Have to admit it's a catchy title," Helena teased. "Guess it gets to the point." The oven timer dinged, and I bustled to the back to save the muffins from burning. I'd barely set them on a rack to cool when Hedrina came in, her face scrunched in confusion, the book in her hands open. "Well? What does it say about raining frogs? There going to be a flood or something?" "I don't know." "It doesn't say?" She shook her head, then turned the book around. The pages were blank. She flipped through it. Each and every page had been wiped clean. I rested my fingers on the paper and quickly pulled away. Magic? Who would erase the pages? Who could even get inside the shop? No idea. Shut the book and tossed it on the nearest counter. We're thinking someone is purposely doing all this, right? I didn't want to say yes, not after Edric just came back into my life. There was no point in pretending otherwise. If I said no, then I was turning a blind eye to the crap happening around us. I thought of the crow that flew into the window and killed itself. Was all of this Heather's doing? I knew her magic inside and out, we all did. But I hadn't sensed her anywhere in that book, or with the frogs, or during the lightning storm. "Damn," I muttered. "What?" I remembered, we still have to find a way to fix the weather mirror. I wasn't even sure there was a way to repair it, if it was destroyed by magic. I cringed, knowing how that phone call with our mother would go. We should probably take it down before we open the shop. Someone honked their car horn outside. It was quickly followed by more bursts, then sounded like one car struck another. "Ah, guys, you might want to get in here," Helena yelled from within the shop. "Now." Rena and I ran to the front in time to see a truck flying by. Horns blared. People argued at the top of their lungs. Sheriff Bernie and Mayor Dillwood were nose to nose, screaming at the top of their lungs. Their faces were red, and they weren't the only ones apparently losing their minds. The two cars that ran into each other a bit further down the road were blocking the way for anyone else to get around. The drivers kept shoving each other. Then one of them threw a punch. I sprinted outside, my sisters right behind me. The yelling was even worse outside, and it was everyone. For no rhyme or reason, Melancholy seemed to have a sudden anger problem. "What the hell is going on?" Hedrina asked, cringing when Mayor Dillwood punched Sheriff Bernie in his beer belly. "Should we break them up?" "Which ones?" Helena asked. "Is that Glinda and Mindy going at it?" I turned in time to see Glinda slap Mindy across the face with her spatula. "Ouch, that looks like it stings." "Oh hell." Mindy had grabbed the spatula and tried to hit the other woman, but she ducked out of the way. They weren't just slapping each other. Nope. Glinda's hand balled into a fist, and she punched Mindy square in the face, knocking her on her ass. Satisfied, Glinda yanked her spatula away and went charging after someone else. What is going on? Do you two feel okay? Hedrina tilted her head back and forth. Think so. I mean, just feeling the usual pent-up rage from Mazeroth. Helena? Our sister shut her eyes as her face twisted up in concentration. I'm good. Wait. Mazeroth's being quiet during all this? She had a point. This was one of those times I would have expected the demonic presence to make itself known and have Hedrina join in the reigning chaos outside our door. She shook her head. He's quiet. It's kind of weird, actually. Not sure I like this. I exchanged a worried glance with Helena. You know what? Lock me in a room somewhere, Hedrina decided. Just in case. Lock her in the office upstairs, I told Helena. You sure that's a good idea? The bookshelf's there. Rena can get to the other room. Change the enchantment so she can't. I handed over the keys to the shop. Better use a magical lock too. Hopefully you won't have to stay in there too long, I told Rena. I'd rather be locked in there all day than hurt someone. As my sisters rushed inside and upstairs to get Hedrina taken care of, just in case Mazeroth did decide to take advantage of the mayhem, I turned my attention to the worst of the fights out on the street. Something had to have caused this. I thought about the frogs, but that didn't seem likely. Then again, nothing about the last few days seemed to make any sense. With the sheriff and mayor still going at it, I was about to run over and break them up when Edric shouted my name. He ran down the sidewalk toward me. What the hell is going on? He asked when he reached my side. You're not affected? Huh? I don't know. I just came out of the house and someone almost hit me with their car. It was a nightmare merely walking into town. He frowned as his gaze shifted to Bernie and Dillwood on the ground, rolling around exchanging very punches. I was about to tell Edric we were coming up with a plan when he smirked. Nice. Get him, Dillwood. I always hated that sheriff. Shit, I whispered as Edric cheered the mayor on louder. Mike stood on the other side of the street, rooting for the sheriff to win. Then he and Edric were throwing insults back and forth. Edric stepped off the curb like he was about to fight Mike when Helena came out of the shop. Grab his other arm. She did so. Together, we managed to drag Edric off the sidewalk and into the store. I blocked his path when he tried to go around us. Helena sprinted to get to the other door, trapping him. Edric rolled his eyes. What are you doing? I'm fine. You said it yourself, I'm not afflicted or whatever. Then why were you yelling at Mike, you idiot? Edric used his hand like a puppet as he parroted me, then added. Whatever. You can't treat me like a child. I'm treating you like you're someone who's about to do something stupid. You're under a spell or a curse or who the hell knows, but I'm going to fix it. I just need you to stay right here and not hurt anyone, I said firmly. Can you do that? What? And let you have all the fun. Just because you're the witch and I'm not, doesn't mean I have to be left out. That's all you ever do, is leave me out of the fun shit. Why can't I mess around with magic, huh? He waved his hands in the air and spun around in circles as he made weird sounds. Look at me, I'm Hadley and I do magic. I'm so perfect and great and the best witch ever. Can't even deal with one stupid demon infestation. I ground my teeth at his harsh words. This isn't you, so I'm going to refrain from punching you, I said slowly, trying to stay calm. Oh, I meant it. Every word. You never let me have any fun. He crossed his arms and pouted like a child. You don't even think I can take care of myself. I'm a grown-ass man if you hadn't noticed. Trust me, we noticed, Helena muttered. Edric mocked her too, and Helena looked ready to start chucking books at his head. More car horns blared outside, and the yelling just kept getting worse. I nodded to the kitchen and motioned to Helena what I wanted her to do. Eventually she got it, and quietly backed out of the shop, leaving me alone with Edric. He sauntered around the room, picking up crystals and callously tossing them into the air. Magic, he said with a bitter laugh. Hasn't done me any good at all. You know, he said, pointing an accusing finger at me, it's all your fault I never moved on. You probably cast a spell or something on me. Made me go all crazy for you when I left. Too bad I didn't. Yeah, okay. Whatever you say. I blew out a breath, and repeated inside my head that he was just acting like everyone else. He kept going on and on about how I ruined his life, and he was only with me because I did something to him. When he was in my face and I was tempted to smack him, Helena returned with one of the kitchen chairs. You know what, Edric? You're right. What? He asked, surprised, finally stopping his tirade. Yep. I use magic for my personal gain, and right now that means trapping you here. I snapped my fingers, and magical ropes appeared out of thin air. They wrapped around his body, and with a push of my hands he was dragged to the chair, forced to sit. The ropes tied him down and held him, no matter how hard he struggled to get free. I dusted my hands and nodded. So, how about we go fix the town before it tears itself apart? I said to Helena, having to yell to be heard over Edric's shouting. Outside I could still hear Edric's yelling, but it blended right in with everyone else. They were all clearly losing their minds. Helena and I wove our way around the fights and shouting matches. We passed several car accidents. Thankfully, no one appeared to have been hurt too badly. We were near the town square when we both looked at each other and nodded. I took her hand in mine. We shut our eyes. Ready? I asked. Oh yeah. Time to freeze the town. Together, we spoke the words for the freezing spell and cast it into the air. I opened my eyes as the spell turned into drops of rain that fell from the sky and landed on every inch of Melancholy. Immediately, the fighting ceased as people froze. If the situation weren't so serious, I might have laughed at how ridiculous everyone looked. If we didn't find the source of this anger, someone was likely to get killed. Where do you want to start? Helena asked. That was a damned good question. I was about to say we should work our way through the town, from one end to another, when a scuffling came from behind us. No one should be able to move during this spell, unless they were resistant to magic. When the sound came again, this time accompanied by a disgruntled growl, I turned slowly. Helena did the same. We walked toward the sound, unsure of who, or rather what was moving through the trees that were the perimeter of the town square garden. We ducked and wove between the people frozen in the midst of punching, following the snarling. The noise turned into muttered words. They weren't in English. Is that demonic? Helena whispered. Sounds like what Mazeroth said, I replied. That was all we needed, another demon to deal with. We reached the edge of the garden and peered around a tree. A creature rushed up to every person along the way. It brushed its hand over them, then grunted in frustration when nothing happened. It's an imp, I said, surprised. You sure? I thought they were extinct. Apparently not. The small creature was indeed a demon, but nothing like Mazeroth. Imps were extremely low level, classified more as a nuisance than anything else. Long ago they'd been used by witches, warlocks, anyone with magic really. They were nasty little creatures if let loose. Its skin was a pale reddish color. Black hair formed patches down its spine, all the way to a long tail that ended in a sharp point. Long claws extended from its bony fingers, and its feet were hooved. Two small horns protruded from the creature's head. When it canted its head, I was able to see the hooked nose and beady black eyes and thin lips that were twisted in a cruel snarl. If I remembered correctly, their bite was venomous and their touch was infectious. That's precisely what was happening here. Someone had unleashed an imp in our town. How do we stop it? Helena asked. We catch it and make it reverse the damage. We need a trap. You want to be bait? She sighed, then nodded. The things I do for this town. I hung back. Helena ran around the other side of the park, so she'd be in the line of sight of the imp. I crept behind, keeping my distance, staying close enough that I could act as soon as it was distracted. I readied a binding spell that, once cast upon the ground, would create a cage. It wouldn't last forever, but we only needed it long enough to make the imp stop making everyone crazy. Once I had the spell ready and waiting to be unleashed, I nodded to Helena, who'd been watching me from behind a parked car. Stepped out from behind the vehicle. "What's going on?" she shouted. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" The imp's head jerked in her direction. He charged straight for her. Non-magical people wouldn't be able to see it, but we could. Helena turned her back to it, as she continued to call for help. As stealthily as I could, I took off after the imp. Just when it raised its hand to touch Helena, she spun around and startled it. "Boo!" The imp shrieked, ready to take off. I snapped my fingers and the spell shot out from my hand. The binding sigil burned into the pavement beneath its feet. As it reached the edge of the circle, an invisible force threw it back to the center. It shrieked louder, then turned its beady glare to us. "Witches," it seethed. "Disgusting, filthy, horrible witches." Ouch, that hurt. Helena bent down to study the beast. "Ha, it's smaller than I expected." The imp launched itself at the edge of the circle, but the binding held. "How about we not piss it off even more?" I suggested, then moved until I stood in front of the creature. "Who summoned you here?" The imp's eyes softened, its entire demeanor changed. "Pretty." "Pretty? Is that her name?" I asked, confused. "Was it a witch?" The imp bared its sharp fangs at me, and scratched at the invisible barrier keeping it from me. "Not witch. Better than witch. Pretty and powerful, and my mistress. Sent me here to prepare. Must finish the job. Must turn everyone or job not complete." "Meaning what?" I mused, more to Helena than the imp. "If he doesn't turn everyone, maybe the spell won't stick." The imp's eye twitched. "So we have to find a way to vanquish an imp, or keep it trapped forever." Helena placed her hands on her hips, studying it. "This sounds like it's going to be an awfully long day. You know how to get rid of one?" "Last I heard there weren't any left, so no, I'm not well versed on imp disposal." "Apparently you heard wrong. I guess I can go back to the house and see if anything I have made up might work." She tilted her head. Hadley, is your binding spell supposed to do that?" "Do what?" "That," she said, pointing to the ground. The imp glanced down, cutting off the quiet demonic rambling it had been doing since Helena mentioned vanquishing it. The binding remained on the pavement, but smoke rose from the symbols now. Acrid black smoke. "No," the imp whispered, then yelled as the smoke stretched up its body until it was completely encased. "Not my fault. Not my fault. Don't want to go back, no please. Mistress, no." It continued to scream and plead until the smoke filled the cage completely. A loud crack which left my ears ringing resounded throughout the town, and when the smoke cleared, the imp was gone, as was the sigil that had bound it. I raised my surprised gaze to find Helena wearing the exact same expression. "What was that?" She blinked, then glanced around the town. "Guess whoever brought it here was worried it'd talk." She nodded to the frozen people. "Want to unfreeze them and see if everything's back to normal?" "Bigger question is, will they remember?" I held out my hand for hers. "Here we go." Lifting the freezing spell was simple enough. The drops of water that created it evaporated into the air. One by one, the citizens of Melancholy came back. As Helena and I walked through town, helping people off the ground and trying to keep everyone calm, it was clear no one recalled why they were now sore or had bloody noses and split lips. Glinda kept staring at her spatula while holding a hand to her forehead like she had a headache. Mr. Jenkins gripped his cane over his head and frowned at Old Man Withers. He held out his hand and hauled the man to his feet, both of them shrugging. Sarah had apparently gotten into a scuffle with her neighbor. They both had baseball bats in their hands, but dropped them immediately in alarm. "Hadley," Sheriff Burney shouted. I cringed as he and Mayor Dillwood marched toward us. "Do I want to know what happened? Why are there multiple car wrecks, and why does everyone look like they were just in a brawl?" Burney asked. I puffed out my cheeks, wondering if I should lie to him or give him the truth. It was very rare that magical situations affected the entire town. Usually, we were able to keep our magic contained and not bring attention to it. Sadly, that was not the case today. Well? Dillwood asked impatiently. An imp, Helena blurted. I shot her a look. What? She hissed at me. Did you say an imp? Dillwood asked quietly. That's what I said. Someone unleashed an imp, and it caused everyone to go a bit crazy, but it's gone, and it would appear that no one is too hurt. Did you two have anything to do with bringing this thing here? Dillwood asked, seeming unable to get the word imp out of his mouth. He, like the mayors before him, knew about the Moonfall family. And he, like the others, accepted what we were. He even came to us from time to time for help of a magical nature. But unlike the mayor before him, he wasn't always so willing to accept every little magical oddity which surrounded us. Honestly, we have no idea, but it's gone. That's what matters, I told him. Sheriff Bernie hoisted his pants up using his utility belt. Good. Saves me from having to shoot the thing. I didn't have the heart to tell our dear old sheriff. His bullets wouldn't have done anything. We'll help get everyone sorted out, promise, I assured them. Just wish I knew who sent it here. That would be the question, Helena murmured. From the look in her eyes, I knew what she was thinking. But even if it was who I thought, what was the point of messing with us now? If it had happened right after Heather had left, I would understand, but it had been 5 years. Why wait? Someone had erased the pages of the Omen book. Someone had caused the lightning storm and made it rain frogs. The imp was a massive step in the wrong direction. Whoever was messing with us just upped the stakes dangerously high. I didn't even want to think about what might happen next. Yelling came from behind me, and I turned to face our shop. Shit. Edric. I'd left him tied up, and he was probably confused as hell. Helena and I rushed inside. Little help, Edric said with a nervous laugh. Something going on I need to know about? I should probably let Rena out of the office. Helena darted upstairs while I worked at untying Edric. You remember anything? I asked once he was on his feet. I woke up and your sister said you'd be here, he said, his eyes narrowing as he peered past me and out the windows. What's going on out there? Was there an accident? A few. So you don't remember? With his eyes still focused on the scene outside, he shook his head, his brow furrowing. No. I mean, I'd been about to leave the house, but then everything's just a blur. Did I do something? You were under the influence of an imp. An imp? Like a creepy elf creature thing. I recalled precisely what this imp looked like and shook my head. Creepy, but think more demon than elf. And you what, killed it or something? Actually, I think the person who sent it here killed it. He winced like his head hurt. I'm so confused. We all are. Don't worry. What's important is the imp is gone, and everyone's back to normal, I explained on a sigh. We just don't know who sent it or why, or what this is all about. So there's that. He pulled me into a hug. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Glad one of us has faith. Helena and Hedrina came downstairs, and we told Rena what was behind the anger outbursts. She said a few choice words about idiots making our lives more complicated, then we all moved outside to help everyone settle down. I kept my eyes open for any hint of the imp's return. Or someone who didn't belong. By the end of the day, we were no closer to understanding who was doing this to us. Or if they were finished, or just getting started.
Chapter 9. Edric. For over a week, I watched the Moonfall sisters tear through every book they owned to figure out who sent the imp that nearly tore the town apart. They'd had no luck, and the stress was getting to them. Hedrina suffered 3 episodes of Mazeroth, forcing his way to the surface. She managed to shut him up fairly quickly, but it drained her. She'd been spending most of the time in her room, with Roger to keep her company. He was the only one she'd let in, aside from her sisters, and they were so busy working on the imp problem, Hedrina hadn't wanted them to waste time sitting with her. I helped out where I could. Hadley had been worried about my job, so I emailed my resignation, then took up my new position at the shop in town. Between my running their storefront and taking care of the books, it gave them time to continue their research and deal with the fallout from the imp attack. No one remembered what they did or said, but that just meant everyone was on edge. Tension filled the air, and there was no longer the feeling of comfort and safety. Hardly anyone stayed out past dark, and those we passed on the sidewalks would give small smiles and waves but never stop to chat. Mayor Dillwood had been by the shop every day to ask the sisters if they had any answers for him. Each time they said no, his aggravation grew. I was worried one of these days he'd go off on them. No one else seemed to be blaming them, at least. Many customers still came in for Hadley's baked goods and Helena's teas and candles. I wasn't surprised they were doing business. After all, when magical things started happening in your hometown, going to the local witch shop was probably your best bet for finding a remedy to your anxiety. It was nearing 4:30, and I was studying the weather mirror on the wall. Hadley and I had tried to remove it 2 days ago, but the thing was magically adhered to the wall. No matter what she tried, it didn't budge, so that was where it stayed. I wasn't exactly versed in how to fix magic glass, but was hoping for some random bit of inspiration. I did plan on calling their parents, since I had a feeling Hadley had not let them know we were back together yet. I figured that move would get me tossed out of the bedroom for at least one night. They hated bugging their parents for anything. Just when I was wondering if there was such a thing as magical resin for the mirror problem, Hadley's shout of frustration came from the kitchen. This was followed by loud clanging. I darted into the back room, worried the imp had come back, only to find her glaring at the floor. I looked around, but she was alone. "You okay?" "Oh, I'm just freaking great." She tossed the oven mitts onto the counter and planted her hands on her hips. I walked around the island to see what she was trying to kill with her death glare, only to find 2 cake pans on the floor. Not only had the cakes crumbled and fallen out when they hit the floor, but they were burnt. In all the time I'd been with Hadley, she'd never burned a single thing. Ever. "All right, how about you move away from the scene of the crime before you make the kitchen spontaneously combust?" "I burned the cakes," she muttered as I guided her to a stool and sat her down. "I see that. I don't burn things. Ever. What the hell is wrong with me?" she gasped. I jumped, thinking that something else had appeared in the kitchen. Again it was just us, and I frowned at her. What if this is part of the curse? I'm going to burn everything I bake from now on. I'm going to be ruined. Her head fell forward into her hands as she shook it. I have to be able to bake. Why couldn't they mess with something else? I chuckled at her overreaction and worked on cleaning up the cake mess. How about you take a breath and calm down? You're having a very stressful week. So you're allowed to mess up. It's just a cake. But what if next time it's not a cake? What if it's a spell or a potion, and I make someone turn purple with bright blue hair and give them a mermaid tail? This time, I couldn't hold back the laughter. Mermaid tail. You never know. Okay, that's it. I think you've been here too long. We're closing up early. Her brow arched, and then she hopped off the stool, following me to the front of the store. Who made you the boss? I'm giving myself a promotion, so my girlfriend doesn't completely fall apart in her own kitchen over a burnt cake. I flipped the open sign to closed, locked the front door, and watched her face shift from annoyance to amusement, and finally to rolling her eyes and saying she was going to clean up the rest of the kitchen real quick. I carried the cash drawer upstairs to the office, did the books in record time, locked it all away in the safe, and met Hadley by the back door. How about a nice relaxing dinner at Mike's, and then a walk through the park? Not sure how relaxing it'll be. No one's going to give you crap about the imp incident, I promised. I think they're getting better. Nothing's happened since then anyway. Which makes all this worse. She tucked her hand in the crook of my elbow as we exited the store, then to the cafe. Why do all of that shit and then just nothing? Maybe the imp was the end game. No, it's too simple. She scuffed her boots along the concrete as we strolled. My gut saying this is far from over. Mazeroth was way too excited during that last episode for there to be nothing else. Did you ever think he's just saying all that shit to keep messing with your head? Well, yeah, but there's always that voice in the back of my mind that asks, what happens if he's right and we ignore him? How about we stay positive for now? I suggested. When something else happens, then you can say, I told you so, and go into total freak-out mode. She leaned into me, then stood on her toes. I bent down enough so she could kiss my cheek. I forgot how nice it was to have you around to keep me sane. I really did miss you, and I'm not sure I can say it enough, but I'm glad you came home. I picked a hell of a time to do it, I mused. But I'm glad too. Also glad you didn't try to magic me out of here before we could talk. Thought about it, she admitted. Not letting you go again. She was about to walk into the cafe, but I gently tugged her back right into my arms and kissed her, not caring who saw. When I set her back on her feet, her lips red from the kiss, she grinned and looked almost sad we were going to dinner. Food first, I said when her stomach growled. Chapter 10. Edric. Dinner went far better than planned. The cafe hadn't been as full as was typical for a Thursday night, but no one gave Hadley a hard time. Many of those present seemed to be trying to relax and get their lives back to normal. Once we finished eating, we headed into the night. It was warm, and we were content to take a stroll through the side streets and along the fence of the old cemetery. There was a path that led from it to the town square garden. Hadley fiddled with the locket around her neck. She'd worn it every day since I'd come back to town. Stars are pretty tonight, she commented, throwing her head back and staring up at the sky. Fluttering overhead drew my attention. I glanced up and thought I spotted a crow flying overhead. It was only for a second, and out of the range of the streetlights, so I couldn't be 100% certain. Yeah, they are, I agreed. Looks like the fog's rolling in. Over the waves crashing against the rocky shore, a white bank of fog had moved in. We paused near the gate at the cemetery, watching it. It's coming in fast, I noted, then frowned. The wind was blowing from the west today, but that fog was moving against it. Weird. I'm sure it's just fog. Hadley continued down the path, and after a couple of seconds, I followed. Now I was starting to sound like the paranoid one, seeing omens where there weren't any. I always liked coming this way, she said, when we reached the black iron fence that surrounded the small cemetery with its old, weather-worn headstones. It's such a peaceful place. Quiet. You are an odd one, I teased. She nudged me. What? Just saying, you like hanging out with dead people. Bit weird. Not hanging out with dead people. They're all buried. Semantics. She rolled her eyes, then turned her gaze toward the garden, about 30 or so yards away. When did that happen? They didn't look like that this morning, did they? What? The trees. I wasn't sure what she was talking about until I really looked at the branches. The leaves of the towering maples had been changing, but now they appeared like they were straight up dying. The leaves were all dead and falling to the ground in large clumps. Hadley rushed over to check them out. A scratching sound made me hang back a second. I glanced over my shoulder, then spun around. The fog that had been over the water had crept onto land already. I could barely see the last couple of rows of headstones. As I watched, the fog continued to push its way through the cemetery, like it was intent on reaching the town. Like it was alive. Ah, Hadley, I said as I backed away from the fence. I can't believe it, they're dying, she exclaimed, clearly not hearing me. Hadley, I said louder, but she kept muttering under her breath. I gave up and sprinted to the garden. I reached for her shoulder, prepared to turn her around and show her the fog when I saw what she was doing. What is that plant? I don't know. Never seen it before. She yanked a bit of the blackish vine from around the trunk of the tree and held it up. With a snap of her fingers, a small ball of fire appeared, giving her more light. Tiny thorns covered the vine, and I told her to be careful not to prick herself. I don't understand. This wasn't here this morning. I know it wasn't. She lifted the small fire higher into the air. With another snap of her fingers, it broke into 5 tiny orbs, then grew as they spread out around the garden. The black vines weren't just wrapped around the one tree, but all of them. Each one had a thick coil of the spiky plant creeping up its branches. I leaned closer to the maple nearest us and watched in disbelief. The spikes on the vine were actually digging into the bark. It appeared to be sucking the life out of the tree. "They're everywhere," Hadley whispered, horrified. Her wide-eyed gaze slowly turned to anger. The vines wove between the blades of grass and throughout the flowers and shrubs. They tore up the ground and seemed to try and trip us when we started to move around the garden. "Is this from the imp?" She looked around, lost, cursing when a vine wrapped its way around her ankle and nearly caused her to fall. "No, I don't know," she snapped. "I don't understand. It's like someone cursed this whole place, and if these vines keep spreading." She stopped as she brought one of the small flames back to her and peered at the ground. "What are you looking for?" "Seeing if these leave the garden," she replied, using her finger to try and follow a single vine. We probably looked ridiculous, hunched over the ground as we walked. Finally, we managed to pick one vine out of the bunch and followed it on its winding, twisted path through the garden and right to the edge where it burrowed underground. I wanted to say it ended there, but as Hadley stepped onto the sidewalk and headed for the curb, she cursed. "It's popping up here," she called back to me. "Damn it. If it keeps up at this pace, it'll spread beneath the whole town in a week." "Should you call your sisters?" I asked, as a prickling sensation started at the back of my neck. I rubbed it, trying to make it go away, but the eerie feeling continued to grow. This time, when I looked back at the cemetery, I couldn't even tell there was a cemetery there. The fog had taken it over and was making its way right for us. "Hadley, I'm not sure this fog is merely fog," I said, hating to make our night worse than it already was. "Hadley." "Huh?" She was crouched at the curb and looked like she was bound and determined to stop that one vine from getting any further. The fog suddenly shifted direction and headed right for her. It picked up speed, and just as I opened my mouth to warn her, a figure emerged. A decayed skeletal figure. "Hadley!" I shouted, but it was like she couldn't hear me. The fog surrounded her, bringing the dead with it. I sprinted to her, willing myself to get there in time. She was almost impossible to make out through the thick mist, but I burst through in time to see the zombie lifting its hand, ready to bring it down on her back. I threw myself between them and winced as sharp claws racked down my cheek and neck. "Edric!" Hadley shouted in alarm, then I was being pulled backward. She whispered something, and the zombie burst into flames, letting out a hollow shriek as it collapsed into a pile of dried bones and ash. "You all right?" "Yeah, just a scratch," I muttered, keeping myself between her and the fog. "That the only one?" More scratching and scraping sounds came from the white mist down the main road. "This is bad." The path to the house was blocked, but the shop was closer anyway. "Get to the store. We'll call your sisters and the mayor and whoever else we need to. Come on." With her hand firmly in mine, we took off together, with the fog dogging our heels. She fumbled with the key to unlock the front door, finally got it open, and we rushed inside, locking it behind us. As I watched the billowing white mist steadily roll down the road, she called her sisters. "They're on their way," she said a few seconds later. "Calling Sheriff Bernie next, then Glinda. They can start the phone tree, and hopefully everyone actually answers this time." Hopefully. I squinted to make out how many zombies were hidden by the fog. There weren't that many tombstones in that cemetery, but 20 zombies were still 20 zombies. The scratches on my face and neck had begun to sting. I pressed my hand to them, trying to ignore the pain, but then they started to burn. I gasped as the pain suddenly increased, and then a wave of dizziness sent me crashing into a nearby display of candles. "Edric," Hadley said, alarmed. She ran to my side. "Fine, just woozy," I said, slurring my words. "I'll be fine." I collapsed to the floor, and her worried face hovering over mine was the last thing I saw when darkness closed in.
Chapter 11. Hadley. I dabbed Edric's forehead with a cold rag, but he remained unconscious. With my sister's help, we laid him on the island in the back room, so at least he was off the floor. "The fog's covered the entire town," Helena said when she came back to the kitchen. "I can't see a way out of it, unless you want us to fly people one by one over the town line." And that was Sheriff Bernie on the phone. Hedrina plopped down on a stool. "Said everyone's been called." Most people answered, but there are a few they can't seem to get a hold of. "He's worried they're in the fog with those zombies." She paused and whispered, "That's really what we're going with? Zombies?" Nervously, I fiddled with the locket around my neck and studied the scratches on Edric's right cheek and neck. "I don't know what else to call a dead body that's been yanked out of its grave," I muttered. "Assuming the entire cemetery has been razed, that's what, 22 of them wandering around? Give or take a couple. Those graves are old. Some of them might only be bones. As strong as this magic seems to be, I have no doubt they're up walking around too," I told Helena. "I don't know what that thing did to him, but these scratches look toxic." I traced the faint bluish lines stretching from the wounds along Edric's face and neck. My chest tightened with fear that I wasn't going to be able to save him, because I had no idea what we were dealing with. My worst nightmare was coming true right before my eyes. This was exactly why I'd wanted him to stay away. If this is poison, I've never seen it before. The dead shouldn't be able to do this. Helena and Hedrina both placed comforting hands on my shoulders. "We'll find a way to save him," Hedrina assured me. "I promise you we will." "How?" "We couldn't even figure out who sent the damned imp." "I just know," she said stubbornly. "We're smart witches. Helena, can you make a salve that'll slow the poison down? Give us some time?" "Yeah, I'm sure I can come up with something with what we've got here." "See?" Hedrina said. "Everything's going to be fine." I wanted to believe her, but this was why I'd sent Edric away the first time. I mean, I had expected the danger to come from Mazeroth finally breaking free of his prison somehow and wreaking havoc. This was worse. Edric twitched and his face screwed up in pain. I held his hand, squeezing it to try and let him know I was right there with him. I wasn't going anywhere. I stood to wet the washcloth again. Just as I sat back down on my stool by the counter, a knock came at the front door. Hedrina and I glanced at each other. She said she'd check it out. I wasn't about to let her go alone, in case it was a zombie. When we reached the front door though, it wasn't a zombie. Hedrina hurried to unlock it, and we ushered a crowd of people inside. A few of them had scratches on their faces and arms, matching the ones Edric received. And right behind them were 3 zombies. I yelled a warning to Hedrina, and she swirled her hands together. Lightning sparked to life between her palms, then wove around her fingers. As the zombies lunged, she unleashed hell on them, charring their bones and burning whatever skin remained on their bodies. The stench had me gagging. The 3 zombies were nothing but ash and bone now. Hedrina glanced left then right, nodding that the coast was clear. Then she stepped back inside and relocked the door. 4 down. Possibly 18 still wandering the streets. The odds were slowly tipping back in our favor. I glanced around the shop, and panic set in when I realized almost everyone had scratches. "All right," I said loudly to get their attention. "Anyone who was touched by the zombies, I need you to follow me." "Zombies?" Glinda shouted. "What were you even doing out there?" I asked, noting the deep scratches on her arm. "I was looking for the people that didn't answer the phone. I found some of them. Bernie was with me, but we got separated in the fog." She staggered forward as her eyes fluttered. "What's going on out there? It's like the damned end of the world with the walking dead people and the murder of crows flying around like they're waiting to eat us." Crows? Hedrina sucked in a sharp breath. She told everyone that Helena was working on a salve for the scratches. If we could just get everyone into the kitchen before they passed out. Nope, too late. Glinda went down first, caught by Mike. 2 seconds later, everyone else who was hurt by the zombies toppled over like human dominoes. Hedrina, the 2 brothers who owned the mechanics shop, and I were the only ones standing. Okay, I said, nodding slowly. Let's get everyone as comfortable as possible in the kitchen, and go from there. You have a plan? Larry, the taller of the 2 brothers, asked. Yep, I most definitely have a plan, I said, which was partially correct. Maneuvering everyone into the kitchen took a bit of time and coordination. Once finished, we had a total of 7 unconscious people. Plus Larry and Lenny, who were hovering close by, clearly worried. I checked on Edric, and fought hard not to lose it in front of everyone. The bluish lines had spread, and now covered half his face and most of his neck. His fever was worse too. I pressed a cold rag to his forehead, then kissed it, willing him to hold on for me. You care to share this plan you have? Hedrina whispered in my ear. Not so much a plan as a crazy idea of what might stop this, I replied. Not like we're trained to fight tiny armies of zombies. No, but we can destroy them. You killed one. I took out a few. Yeah, but we can't see them coming, and if we get scratched, there's a high chance we're not resistant to whatever is poisoning everyone else. Then I guess it's good you have some sort of a plan, instead of having us sit here twiddling our thumbs. She shot the guys a smile. So? What's this idea of yours? I told her about the black vines Edric and I had found in the town square garden. Her gaze darkened, until she was looking as worried and angry as I probably did. So you think by destroying the vines we'll stop this? She asked. I think there's something in the garden causing those vines to grow. We find that and destroy it, and with any luck, this all will stop, I amended with a shrug. It's all I've got, and we don't have time to sit around and think about it. Not now. Once Helena came back down with the salve, we'd get the wounded squared away, and then we'd go tackle those vines. I'd planned to tear them out of the ground when I first saw them. I had no proof something was buried in the dirt, causing them to grow, just instinct telling me that was where we needed to be. Glinda's comment about the crows had my mind drifting back to who was behind this shit. I didn't want it to be Heather. Until we had physical evidence pointing to her, I wasn't going to believe it. She might have turned on the family and nearly killed us, but deep down, she was still my blood. She was still one of us. Chapter 12. Hadley. We're ready, Helena said from behind me. I nodded, not taking my gaze off Edric. He almost woke up a little while ago, but if he realized I was with him or where he was, I couldn't tell. I'll be back soon, I whispered, removing the locket from around my neck. I tucked it in the palm of his hand, then kissed his temple. Promise I'll be back and I'll fix this. Larry and Lenny had been given strict instructions how to look after everyone once we were gone. They'd taken it in stride, and told us they wouldn't let anything happen to any of them. Probably helped they both served in the military a few years back. Helped them stay calm as Helena explained to them how the salve would work, and that we placed heavy warding around the shop to keep the zombies out. With one last look at Edric, I joined Helena at the base of the stairs. Hedrina was waiting for us on the roof. Once we arrived atop, she handed me my old pale blue broomstick with white bristles. Her black one was in her other hand, ready to go. Helena picked up her neon green one and nodded. Right, everyone knows the plan, she asked. I checked the satchel slung across my body. It was filled with flash bomb potions that would give us a chance to see the zombies before we landed in the midst of them. Get to the cemetery, see if the vines have reached the graves, I said. If they have, follow them back to the garden and find the center of the growth. Hedrina checked the satchel around her body. Crystals are ready to go. Good. We lay them out, and with any luck, they'll create a strong enough barrier to give us time to do what we have to do and not get scratched or bitten. If we do, then we all become poisoned and die with everyone else, Helena rambled. Then she smiled. Let's do this. You seem way too excited about this, I told her as she climbed onto her broom. Nope, just my old happy self. You ate some of the muffins, didn't you? I accused her with a frown. How many? 2 or 5, she mumbled. Of the optimism ones? Great, you're going to be smiling while the zombies are chomping on your face. You know you're not supposed to eat that many at a time. She leaned over and patted my cheek, still grinning. Last one to the cemetery, has to kiss a zombie. She let out a hoot of excitement, kicked off the roof and soared up into the air. Guess we better go after her, I said with a sigh. I don't know. With that attitude, she might be able to take them all on alone. Hedrina and I pushed off the roof and caught up to Helena. With our broomsticks, we were able to fly over the fog and stay out of reach of the zombies. Unless they learned to fly, of course. Then we were screwed. It was hard to see the cemetery, but we flew in the general direction of where it was located. Once I thought we were close, we hovered in the air and I dropped a flash bomb into the mist. Oh goddess, Hedrina whispered as the bomb went off. 10 shadows appeared in the white fog. They paced around the cemetery, as if they were guarding it. I dropped another one where I thought the garden was. I cursed. Another 7 milled around the trees, protecting the center. I think your theory's right, Helena said, all bubbly, her fingers tapping away nonstop on her broomstick. Okay, Helena, how about you fly low and check out the cemetery, Hedrina suggested. I was going to tell her not to, but then Helena flipped over backward with her broom and disappeared into the fog. Are you crazy? I told Hedrina. You can't say things like that to her, not in that state. I didn't think she'd do it. She squinted and flew around in tight circles. Shit. Should we go down there and check on her? A plume of fire erupted beneath us, followed by Helena's excited laughter. When a second plume shot into the sky right between us, a head came with it, apparently detached from whatever zombie Helena just blew up. A few seconds later, our sister was back with us, her face covered with soot, her pixie hair scorched at the ends. Hedrina patted it out, then asked her how it went. Good. Great, actually. You know, I always liked fire spells the best. The cemetery, I said, trying to remain patient. Did you see the vines? Yep, took over the whole damn place. I turned myself around in the sky and aimed for the garden. We'll drop a few flash bombs, see where they are, then land. Helena, your job is to get them out of there with me. Once the garden's clear, Hedrina, you lay the crystals out. Then we start digging? Helena asked, still way too excited. Then we dig. We flew to the center of the garden, the best we could tell anyway, and I dropped several flash bombs in quick succession. As each one detonated with a muffled boom, the shadows of the dead wandering around came into view. A couple had left, appearing to have gone to the cemetery to deal with the threat from Helena. There were only 4 now to contend with. As the flash from the last bomb began to fade, we descended through the layers of cold fog and into the garden. I snapped my fingers, and a burst of fire formed between my hands. Helena did the same, cackling like a madwoman as she went for the first zombie dumb enough to turn her way. Hedrina stayed in the air, waiting for the all clear. Armed with fire, I forced 2 zombies to the edge of the garden and onto the sidewalk. Keeping them there wasn't too hard, until more came to join them. The fire spread, turning into a wall, but cold sweat broke out on my forehead from the strain. Helena, I yelled over my shoulder, any time now. Working on it. An explosion rocked the ground. Helena called for Hedrina to drop the crystals. A glowing circle of white light formed around the garden, blocking out the zombies. Hedrina landed as the fire from my hands died away. The zombies looked at the magical barrier, confused. They pressed their hands against it, but the crystals kept them out. Let's move it, I said in a rush and raced to the center of the garden. Hedrina and Helena joined me. We focused on where the most significant growth of vines sprouted out of the ground. The tendrils were as thick as my waist, and the spikes were a good 6 inches long. A dark substance oozed from them. I warned my sisters to avoid them as we formed a small circle. Clasping hands, we focused on the dirt blocking our way to whatever dark magic brought these vines to our town. As if with an invisible shovel, the dirt moved and shifted, dragged off the vines and deeper still. The vines twisted and curled in on themselves the further down we dug. 3 feet, then 4, and there was no end in sight. We stepped back, our palms facing each other, but we were too far away to stay physically connected. We made the circle wider in case we were off-center. Mounds of dirt grew around our feet. Finally, the vines began to change. They pulsed with power, and something beneath them in the earth seemed to be alive. A sound like a steady heartbeat met my ears. "What the hell is that?" Helena asked, then yelped as she was suddenly yanked back. Helena. A vine had wrapped around her waist and threw her into the nearest tree. She struggled to get free, but it slammed her harder. Her head hit the trunk and she went limp. I urged our power to dig deeper and find the root of this mess when a vine trailed up my leg. Just as it was about to snatch me away, Hedrina shocked it with a small bolt of lightning from her hands. "Find it," she ordered me, then turned her back to me and attacked the vines that had sprung to life around us. I focused all my energy on digging deeper and deeper. Desperation had me on my knees, hauling out dirt with my hands as my magic helped me, tearing and burning the vines that got in my way. Helena's curses told me she regained consciousness, but when I chanced to glance her way, I saw more vines trying to wrap around her. Hedrina was shocking vines left and right, but 2 managed to get around her legs. They took her down. She was running out of energy fast. They dragged her away, and then it was just me. I tuned out their yelling, and the sound of the vines rushing through the shrubs and grass coming for me. The dirt was embedded under my nails, and my fingertips were raw from yanking vines and tossing them over my shoulder. The heartbeat grew louder. My stomach clenched with uneasiness at the magic wafting out of the hole. I told myself not to look up, but did anyway. A wall of vines was forming around me, blocking sight of my sisters or a way out. Unable to look away, I kept on digging, waiting for the moment when that last vine would close in around me, and I'd end up buried in this garden forever. Then my fingers brushed something not dirt or vine. Fabric? There, under my hand, was the corner of some sort of black material. I grabbed hold of it and pulled it out of the ground. The heartbeat was much louder now, echoing around me like steady, rumbling thunder. A hex bag. Someone planted a hex bag in the middle of the garden. It was larger than any I'd seen before. As the vines continued to trap me, I untied the rope on the hex bag and it fell open. "Goddess," I yelped and dropped it. There, staring up at me, was a perfectly clean skull. Symbols had been etched into the bone. Beneath it were several onyx stones, crystals, and long black feathers. Crow feathers. 3 small bundles of herbs were also part of the bag. Crimson thorn and queen's heart, 2 herbs that brought bad luck and were usually associated with death in the craft. Whoever created this hex bag knew what they were doing. "Heather," I whispered as my gaze landed on the crow feathers again. I searched for any hint of her magic but found none. The vines suddenly pressed against my back, and with a yell, I snapped my fingers and sent a ball of fire at the center of the hex bag. It went up in flames. A loud shriek filled the night. The vines crackled as the hex bag burned. The vines fell. Helena and Hedrina rushed over to me and hugged me, neither looking too much worse for wear. "You okay?" I checked the back of Helena's head. "We're fine," she said, shoving my hand aside. "Is that a hex bag?" "Was a hex bag," I said as the last of it burned away, and the flames licked at the sides of the skull. There were crow feathers in it. "Did you sense her?" Hedrina whispered. "No. I honestly have no idea who's behind this mess, but I'm starting to think it's not Heather." We watched the last bits of the hex bag turn to ashes, then we smothered it with dirt. We held onto the skull. That was the only thing left. It would be locked away in our attic, somewhere safe where it couldn't be used again. As we rose and glanced around, the last bits of fog rolled out to sea. The zombies had fallen where they stood, outside the crystal barrier. Hedrina collected the crystals. My heart pounded in my chest. "Go," Helena told me as she took the skull. "We got this." I sprinted to the shop, lowered the ward so I could get inside, and burst into the kitchen. Larry and Lenny were murmuring, but seemed excited. "Hadley, look," Larry said and pointed to Edric's face. "It's like he was never hurt at all. They're all like that." Edric's face and neck had indeed healed. I performed a quick glance over the rest of the wounded people. Their scratches were gone too. "Is it over?" Lenny asked. "Yeah, it's over. Everyone's safe now." I went back to Edric's side and squeezed his hand. He squeezed it back lightly but didn't wake up. That was fine. He probably needed to sleep off the effects of the poison. Once my locket was back around my neck, I asked the guys to help me arrange to get everyone home and check in with Sheriff Burney and Mayor Dillwood. This situation definitely called for an explanation. Chapter 13. Hadley. A couple of hours later, my sisters and I sat at our kitchen table. The sheriff and the mayor listened as we finished telling them what caused the fog, the dead, and we believed the rest of the strange events in town. Edric was resting quietly upstairs in my bed, still not awake. The others had been returned to their homes too. The sheriff suddenly rose to his feet, sniffed loudly and nodded. "Right then, I'm going home." "Just like that?" the mayor asked, confused. "You heard him. Some asshole buried a hex bag at the heart of our town. They found it, destroyed it, and we get back to our lives now. Case solved." He pointed at me and said quietly, "I expect to have a fresh batch of muffins in the morning." He winked. "You got it, Sheriff." He tipped his head to my sisters, then left. Mayor Dillwood's mouth opened and closed a few times, until then he finally stood. "You're sure it's over?" he asked. "As far as we can tell, yeah, it's over," Helena said, still sounding too happy. He gave her an odd look, then shook his head. "And you don't know who did it?" "Nope," I said quickly. "But the second we figure it out, you'll be the first to know." That was the only answer I could give him. He seemed to accept it for now. He said he'd see us in the morning, then followed Burney out of the house. Once they were gone, we looked intently at each other. "We need to know who did this," Hedrina said, holding a mug of tea between her hands. "We will," I assured her. "That skull might have some answers." "Sounds like a problem for tomorrow," Helena chimed in brightly. "We kicked ass tonight, and I think we deserve some sleep." My tendency to overthink and anticipate the worst started to kick into high gear, until Edric's calming voice flowed through my mind. Time and again, he told me to stop assuming the worst was going to happen and simply live. I flattened my hands on the kitchen table and rose, determined to truly turn over a new leaf. "Oh, what are you doing?" Helena asked, when I went to the cabinet in the corner and pulled out a bottle of tequila. "I am making margaritas. We saved the town. Everyone's going to live. There are no more zombies. Before whoever's messing with us tries to pull another stunt, I'm going to have a drink and enjoy the fact that we're still here." Hedrina laughed. "I'll drink to that." "Great. What about you, Bubbles?" I asked Helena. Helena smirked, then reached for some glasses. "Right behind you." Laughing and passing around the bottle of tequila, we climbed to the roof of our house and drank until the sun came up on a wonderfully ordinary day.
Chapter 14. Edric. Everything was fuzzy. That was the only word that came to mind as my eyes opened, and I tried to speak. My mouth was dry and my limbs weighed a ton. I wasn't sure where I was at first, until my blurry vision cleared. Hadley's room. How had I gotten here? The last I remembered, I was in the shop with her and the zombies. I sat up in a panic, but the room spun, so I fell right back down to the bed with a groan. "Edric." The door to the bedroom opened, and Hadley ran inside, hugging me and kissing my forehead. "You're awake." "About damn time." She smacked my shoulder, then kissed me again. Ouch, what was that for? I asked through an uncertain laugh. You scared the shit out of me, that's what, she murmured, pressing her lips to mine. But wait, I said as I held her shoulders and managed with her help to sit up this time. The zombies. We had just run into the shop and then, I don't remember anything else. Are they gone? They didn't hurt you, did they? I tried to check her for injuries. Suddenly she was kissing me again, and I was distracted. I'm fine, everyone's fine. You missed a hell of a good time. Meaning what? Meaning we fought off a pack of zombies, possessed evil plants, and found the cause of everything that's been going on. Someone planted a hex bag. Really? Yeah, a big nasty one, but it's gone, and the town is back to normal. Well, she amended, as normal as it can be with a bunch of witches living in it. I kept staring at her, waiting for the old Hadley to show through, the worrywart who was constantly waiting for something terrible to happen. The longer I looked, the more I couldn't seem to find her. How would you look at that? What? A bunch of craziness happened, and you're not trying to kick me out of your life. She sighed and rolled her eyes. Look, you may have been right about a few things. And I'm not going to sit here and claim it's all over, because someone obviously planted the hex bag. I doubt it was just for shits and giggles, which means our lives are probably going to get messy again, but I'd rather face it all with you than not. Finally, I muttered, throwing my legs over the side of the bed. I stood, wobbling for a second, then righting myself. What are you doing? You should be resting. I have to do something first, then I promise I'll rest for the next week. When I reached the door to her room, she was right there to stop me. Just have to grab my stuff from Glinda's. I brought it here this morning. She pointed to the corner where my traveling bag sat. Perfect. I changed direction and dug through the bag, searching in vain for one tiny little item. I cursed, worried that I'd lost the damn thing, until my fingers finally found the small velvet box. Ah, there you are, I exclaimed, then pulled it out and turned around. What are you up to? She asked with an arched brow. Not waiting. I held out the box, then opened it to reveal a silver ring, embedded with sapphires. Her eyes went wide and her jaw dropped. I've had this for a long, long time, I told her as I removed the ring from the box. I meant to give it to you so many times, but then I thought it was too late. Now we're together again, and I refuse to let this sit and collect dust any longer when it belongs on you. Edric, she whispered, tears shimmering in her eyes. Hadley Moonfall, will you be my wife? I asked as I held her left hand, the ring poised to go on her finger. Have a life that's filled with magic and adventure. With me burning everything I try to cook for you, and crazy nights on the roof and who knows what else. She said nothing for an exceptionally long time, or so it seemed, then nodded. Yes, she whispered, then said it louder. I slipped the ring on her finger, and she threw herself into my arms. As she pressed her lips to mine, cheers and applause erupted from the hallway. We turned to find Hedrina and Helena standing there. About damn time, Helena said, then threw her hands into the air. We get to plan a wedding. Oh goddess, Hadley murmured. I think we've just created a monster. I think I can live with that. I kissed her again. With a snap of her fingers, her bedroom door closed on her sisters. She laughed as we held each other close, ready for the rest of our lives together.
Chapter 15. Hadley. I rolled over in the middle of the night, smiling at the sight of Edric's sleeping face. His arm was draped over my waist, keeping me safe and warm. Helena and Hedrina were already busy working on plans for the wedding. My wedding with Edric. I still couldn't believe it was finally happening. Carefully, I sat up and slipped from the bed. I pulled on my sweatshirt, then headed downstairs to grab a glass of water. My stomach grumbled, and I decided a late-night snack wasn't a bad idea. When I reached the kitchen, I peered out the back windows and up at the sky. The moon was bright tonight, despite not being full. The longer I looked at it, the more my worries grew, until it was all I could think about. I might have been able to convince Edric I wasn't freaking out, But the truth was, I anxiously awaited the next attack. Someone planted that hex bag in the garden. Someone powerful enough to summon an imp and make the dead rise. Someone who wanted our attention. Now that they had it, the question remained, what would they do next? I held up my left hand, and the engagement ring glimmered in the single light I turned on. This was the right decision. With Edric, I could be happy and stay focused. I could set aside the guilt I'd been holding onto about hurting him. It was time to move forward together, no matter what happened. A shadow flying through the night sky caught my eye. I froze. A crow landed on the top of the greenhouse and looked at me through the window. Heather. The second I whispered her name, the crow cawed loudly, spread its wings and took off into the night. I watched it fly across the moon, then disappear. When she was still here with us, the crows had become her messengers and her friends. She had a connection with them. If she needed to tell us something, she sent a crow. Every time we saw a crow this past week or so, it had been right before one of the incidents happened. Maybe they weren't an omen that our sister was coming back to harm us. Maybe they were a warning that something was coming, something she knew about and was trying to save us from. No longer hungry, with questions swirling around in my head making it throb, I turned to go back to bed. Absently, I reached up for the locket around my neck, then froze. What? The locket I'd been wearing only seconds ago was gone. I hurried upstairs and checked the room, careful not to wake Edric. The necklace wasn't in the bed or on the floor. There was no trace of it. None. I glanced out the window one last time, as the sensation of someone watching me made me back away from the glass. Whoever started this game was far from finished playing. I just hoped we were ready for whatever came next. My gut told me we weren't even close to prepared.
Thank you for listening. This has been a Ciara Graves book. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of new releases.